get started. We're getting.
Okay. So is everybody in?
Yes, 30 of us have joined right now.
Okay, I'm getting some sort of tones. Don't know why that is. Well, forgive me. I turned my phone off, but they can call through to my unit as well. So forgive me the interruption. I want to welcome everybody to today's class hosted by NAMI Urban Los Angeles. Today's class is designed for those seeking involuntary mental health treatment for their loved ones and various options. Primarily, we're talking about an LPS conservatorship. So various supportive resources will also be offered today, even though the resources offered are from Los Angeles, because this is, after all, Los Angeles NAMI group, Urban Los Angeles. Just keep in mind that the conservatorship laws and everything that applies to it statewide. So this will be an excellent meeting for those that have not heard it before. The Los Angeles Department of Mental Health is also with us today, and they'll be sharing information on the new CARE Act and the pilot project for the homeless people. And additionally, they'll discuss the assisted outpatient treatment program there in Los Angeles, and that also is statewide. So I just would like to let you know that today's presenter are Gail Evangelotti, who is, my partner in crime. She's NAMI Urban LA's LPS Conservatorship founder and director. Also, we'll have Louis Leyva, the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health acting chief deputy director of the Public Guardian's Office. Linda Boyd from LA Department of Mental Health, supervisor for assisted outpatient treatment, is also here. She's going to be talking about some AOT services today. So we're also especially honored to have Los Angeles Mental Health Court Judge Scott Herron, who will be joining us a little bit later on today as well. And last, I'm Jim Farrell. I'm the director of the Orange County Conservator Assistance Group and representative for NAMI Urban Los Angeles. Gail and I have been tag teaming between our counties for the last 10 years, helping families however we can with their conservatorship issues. What we're presenting today is information that we have accrued over the last, 10 and more years in Gail's case. And it's information that has been learned as we go, you might say. We're not attorneys. We have learned this presentation. Gail put this together for all of us. And it's from those that are attorneys, those that are doctors and so forth, that have taught her, and Gail has been my mentor over the last 10 years. So and just keep in mind, we're not attorneys. We cannot offer legal advice to anybody. Just want you to know that. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and start the meeting today. We did have somebody ask me if this is going to be recorded for their to review it later on, and probably not. I don't believe so. However, all of the presentation apps, the PowerPoints and so forth, those will be available, and you can certainly see those from today's class as well as tomorrow's. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start the meeting.
I think we are recording. Araceli, are we recording?
Yes, we are recording. So that's why we do ask if people could stay muted. And if you want to share any opinions or questions or story time, please use the chat until Q&A when we can turn off the recording just for privacy. Thank you.
Araceli, is that recording then going to be made available to those that are in today's class?
Yes, so right now we have the old recording on our website on NAMI Urban LA under the LPS tab. It's the last LPS class we have. So every time we have one, we'd like to update it. Yes, correct.
Great.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
That's my question. Thank you. These individuals that are listed here, Linda Boyd, Louis Leyva, myself, and Gail, are here for you guys. If you have questions, if you have an emergency, you can always contact me here in Orange County. Gail's on the East Coast, so please keep that in mind if you have to call her. She's 3 hours ahead, so it may only be 10 o'clock in or 9 o'clock where you are, but you're going to wake her up in the middle of the night. You don't want to do that. So anyway, we'll make this available to you later in the presentation as well. Okay, so this slide basically is saying that we really hope that those that are in today's class will research their representatives that are in government that represent them and get to know what they represent. Become an advocate, get involved, contact your elected representatives and let them know what your needs are. And especially for mental health and conservatorship, you want to let your opinions be expressed to them. Next slide.
Okay, the LPS conservatorship is basically involuntary mental health treatment. That's the term that's used in California. It's specific to California. No other state uses that term for involuntary mental health treatment. Each state uses different terminology. So if you're dealing with another state, you want to research and find out what that is. The essence of the LPS conservatorship is to mandate medication. That's it, basically. There are other things that go along with it. We're going to discuss that. But the essence is to mandate medication. And just to let you know, what Jim and I are presenting to you is what we've learned from y'all, because each case is so different. And we just share with you what will give you the greatest probability for recovery for your loved one, whether you need the standard of involuntary mental health treatment, or maybe somebody just coming and helping you might be assisted outpatient treatment, and they have other programs coming up. So we're kind of blessed in LA that we do have a strong advocacy for mental health. Next slide, please. The right to be well. All of our loved ones have a right to be well. And sometimes you need the LPS conservatorship to help them to get on the road to recovery. It's nothing more than a tool for treatment, which will give them that opportunity to regain their life back. Without the medication, you may as well be talking to the brick wall. You'll have better success getting that brick wall to do something than you will with your loved one without the appropriate medication so that the neurons in their brain connect and make sense. Next slide. These are resources that will help to open the doors for treatment. If you don't have SSI, SSDI, Social Security, or VA benefits, or Medi-Cal, Medicare, then these are the things that you want to try and get. And we're going to talk to you how to get that. You don't call Social Security and say, I'd like to apply. They'll just hang up on you. When it comes to your personal money, put your money away. The moment you bring it out, unless you're a billionaire, millionaire, multimillionaire, kiss your retirement and your vacations goodbye, because you will be sucked dry. You don't want to do that. You want them to have resources, because resources open the doors for treatment. And we're going to talk about this shortly after we go over how to build a powerful case for treatment. Next slide. SSI and SSDI, basically you want to get that because that gives them income, which is helpful. Medi-Cal and Medicare are like healthcare insurance. Medi-Cal is state, Medicare is federal. And Medicare is usually granted 2 years after they get Social Security disability income, known as SSDI. They do not need a work history to get SSI. And Medi-Cal, if you need it, if they're in the hospital, you can, now that one you can apply for and get emergency Medi-Cal, but they have to sign the paper. And that you give to the social worker at the hospital to get your loved one to sign. If they don't sign, because they're not ill, you are, of course, then it's more reason for getting the LPS conservatorship. It's not a criteria, but it's just builds on the case. Next slide.
So you want to write a powerful, concise case for treatment. Primarily what you're wanting to do to obtain a conservatorship is to keep really concise notes on the types of behaviors that your loved one is exhibiting, and putting those together in such a way that you can present that information to a doctor. It's almost like trying to prepare for a court case. The laws here in the state of California allow parents to share information about their loved ones' behaviors and mental health issues with the doctor, hospitals, emergency responders, and so forth. And you want to put that together in a way that is very succinctly arranged. Next slide. This is an example of how you would put together that information. These doctors don't have time to look at 5 pounds of paperwork when you haul it into the hospital. They would say, gee, I'm very sorry, I have 30 other patients to see, and I have other hospitals to go to. I can't help you. Whereas if you put it together in such a way that, for example, hospitalized May 1st to present 2023 at Kaiser Permanente Hospital and so forth, on down the page in this type of fashion, the doctor can just get a really quick overview of what's going on with your loved ones and the type of events that are repeating themselves like this. As well, down at the bottom of this, you want to list any kind of medications that they may be allergic to. Haldol, for some people, will cause their tongue to swell and shut off their airways. So you want to list anything like that that is concerned. Mention the insurance and so forth. Next slide. What you want to also include at the bottom of the history page is a list of allergies, medications that they should not have, medical problems such as diabetes, heart, etc., resources available such as SSI and Medi-Cal. Next slide. On the back side, now we've looked at how the front side should look. We want to best kind of describe what's going on with your loved ones. So these are the symptoms and characteristics that are examples of the type of behaviors that maybe your loved one is experiencing. They may see visual hallucinations. They may see ghosts or dead people. They may see people with pointed chins and beaked noses. They laugh or smile. This is really a common one. They laugh or smile for no reason. And you just think they're having happy thoughts, when actually they're responding to internal voices inside their head. They may hear the television speaking to them, or the FBI is telling them or her what to do, him or her what to do. Or maybe they're saying, gee, you know, our dog Taffy's able to talk to me now. That's great. So these are kind of symptoms that are really important to kind of list on the backside so the doctor can get an overall view of what's going on with your loved one. Next slide.
Okay. When you're doing these slides, you can put in 2, 3, 4 examples. If a category does not apply, delete the whole thing. But the first page, only one page for the mental health history. The doctors aren't interested in what happened 20 years ago or something. Predominantly the last 2 years, 3 at the most. So not more than one page on the mental health history. Then the second and part of the page should be these symptoms and characteristics. Be sure everything applies to mental illness. For instance, if you put keeps their room messy, you've qualified every teenager in America. But if their room is uninhabitable, that's a big difference. And if you have this on the internet, which we do have it, I mean, if you can email me and I'll send it to you, copy and paste it. It makes it easier to go through, delete what doesn't apply and add what does. And where you have like a him/her, delete the gender that does not apply. Because if you leave it, the doctor will tend to look at that and go, oh, they copied this someplace, and discard the whole thing. So you definitely want to proofread. This is specific to your loved one. And only phrases. they've heard it all before in one phrase or another. So they don't, you don't want to be going on telling them over and over. To you, it's new and it's like, oh my gosh. But to them, they've heard it day in and day out. So many of these things are so common. It's unbelievable. Next slide. These are just some of the characteristics that you're going to see with people. They go into houses uninvited. We had one girl go into a house. She's using the computer. The guy came down in the morning. She looked at him and she said, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" It wasn't her house. He didn't know who she was. So, I mean, these are things that they do because they are not in touch with reality. And we're going to help them get back in touch with reality and get their life back. That's the goal. And the fact that y'all are here says a lot about you guys. And I mean, really, you're powerful, strong people. Next slide. These are tips, and these are very important. When it comes to substance abuse, don't put that on the paper and don't even discuss it. When they go to the hospital, they'll run tests on the person. They know what's in their system. When they ask you about it, your comment to them is, "I am sure because of their mental illness, they are self-medicating." You concentrate on the mental health and the gravely disabled. Those are the two things. Nothing else is important. Now, if you're applying for AOT, in that case, you can discuss it. But when they're in the hospital, once you start discussing mental health, the hospital will say, "Well, this is a substance abuse problem, so we're going to discharge." You don't want that to happen. If they've beaten somebody up because they're really way out of it mentally, don't mention that, because it limits where they can go for treatment unless it's a state hospital. So you put they're highly aggressive towards. Now that you can put in the writing, highly aggressive towards their mother, towards the neighbors, whatever. But they're a liability and facilities will not take them. So you have to be careful about that. When they're in the hospital, what you do, the hospitals say they'll tell you, "We're going to discharge them today at 3:00. Will you be picking them up?" And you go, "But I want an LPS conservatorship." Well, they don't meet that criteria. So we're going to discharge them at 3:00. Will you be picking them up? Okay, I guess so. The hospital's correct. They do not meet the criteria for the LPS conservatorship. And we're going to go back over this. This is important. The definition for gravely disabled is they cannot provide for their food, clothing, or shelter. But if somebody else is willing to provide for it, they're not considered gravely disabled. Now, Jim, you said something to the hospital or to the court, I think, about the food, clothing, and shelter. They said they were going to discharge him. Would you like to tell us what you said? Because I thought it was very well stated.
Oh, that was a little bit different circumstance. Basically, they wanted to know that in the case that our son were to be removed from conservatorship, would I still be willing to assist him with all his needs? And my response was, if you remove my son off of conservatorship, that would be because he doesn't need my assistance any longer. They were basically, the moment you say, "Oh, well, yes, even if he's off of conservatorship, I'll help him with whatever he needs. I'll give him a ride. I'll help him find an apartment. I'll help him find." They're not meeting criteria because you're assisting them. So I've actually had a judge and I've had a public defender both try that one on me just to see if they could get our son off of conservatorship, and I was 2 steps ahead of them.
So that's really important to be careful what you say, and don't over elaborate. Say as little as possible, because whatever you're saying, they will be trying to look for a loophole to use against giving treatment to your loved one. Okay, so those are 3 tips that are really important. Next slide. Common symptoms. Now, these are things that if you're first new to mental illness, it's hard to handle. A racial People who are mentally ill, it's not uncommon for them to become racial against everyone who is not them. This one young man did not like Black people, hated them. And his mom says, I don't get it. He's Black. It doesn't matter. Anybody who is not him, they can become, doesn't mean they are, but many people become very racial against everybody who's not them. Heightened sexual delusions. We had one lady who was well in her 60s. She was going to have a baby the next day. They have delusions that mom or dad have molested them, or they've been gang raped or whatever. You can generally tell if it's a delusion. It's not, cut and dry. But if they give you a generalization, well, it happened. It happened, that kind of thing, then chances are it's a delusion. If they can give you a lot of details, I'd sure as all heck be investigating it, because chances are that did happen. So, okay, another one that they do, FBI, CIA, other people are following them. And that's real to them. I mean, it's really real to them. So don't argue with them. Just tell them, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I don't see it that way, or that must make you feel very uncomfortable. Those kind of things. If you start telling them those aren't true, they will shut off their conversation with you. You need that conversation with them to know what they're thinking at all times, even when they're in recovery, and keep a journal that's specific to what they're saying and what they're doing. Another thing is they're not ill. Everybody else is. You are. I mean, so much so they'll take you to the hospital, get you admitted if they can. So these are very real things to them. They're not doing things on purpose. It's real. One thing to try to understand what they're thinking or how they're feeling. Think of yourself. When you have a dream at night, you're here one minute, there a next minute. Nothing makes sense. You don't have a conscience of right or wrong, or I shouldn't be doing this. Things just kind of happen. When you wake up, you probably won't remember the dream. If you do, it's very little. That's pretty much the state that their mind is in. So those things are real to them. All right, next slide.
Gravely disabled defined. A person with a serious mental illness cannot, because of their illness, provide for their food, clothing, or shelter. We've covered this, but it goes on. If someone else can provide for their food, clothing, or shelter in a safe manner, then they will not be considered gravely disabled, and the LPS conservatorship will not be granted. So refer food, clothing, shelter to safety or health risk. Primarily, you can say, well, they can, live someplace, maybe in a tent, a makeshift tent, but they don't have a safe place to put that tent up. They're out in the street. Anyone can attack them. You want to kind of stress how their clothing, yes, they have clothing, but it has been washed in probably a year and it probably has germs and everything else. They just are a health risk to themselves. And so you want to stress that and to the doctors and others when they're trying to make a determination on whether or not they're gravely disabled. Next slide. Gravely disabled, shelter, may not come and live at home, has no place to live safely, cannot handle a shelter or board and care safely. So when your loved one is in the hospital and you're attempting to get them a conservatorship, you want to let the hospital know that they cannot come home, and because of their instability of mind, that they can't successfully live in a board and care. It's not a high enough level to provide that level of care and safety for them. Perhaps they've lost significant weight from not eating. I remember a family contacted me one time and they were telling me that their son had an insulin pump and he had shut the insulin pump off. And he was afraid also that the parents were trying to poison him, and he had lost significant weight. These were really the two factors that got them the ability to get their son into the hospital. So you want to talk about these kinds of things. They may take their clothes off at an inappropriate time and place. They wear clothes for excessive periods of times. They may smell horrible. They may dress inappropriate for the weather. I, can say that you can see somebody that is out in the hot sun and it's maybe 95 degrees and they're wearing all black and they have a jacket on and they have sweatshirt under the jacket. Something's wrong there. They are not able to manage their temperature. They don't really kind of perceive that it's too hot for them. And they also don't have any insight into the illness, and that's a big one. Therefore, they'll not take their medication, and they have a history of non-compliance. I noticed in the chat, one of the parents made a brief statement that their loved one was compliant with meds. Well, we'll talk about that later in the game. But primarily, I can't tell you how many families have told me that their loved ones really don't believe that they have a mental health condition. They start off on their meds, coming out of the hospital, and they're doing really well and stable, and all of a sudden they just say, I don't need this anymore. I'm not going to take these medications. They make me feel a little tired or whatever it is. I don't like these, and they just nosedive again. They go right on down, and they have to be rehospitalized. Okay, so next slide. You want to, as a conservator, decide the direction for treatment. So there's a recovery model, which is like the full service partnership. Here in Orange County, we have, for example, a FSP called Telecare. They have actually places where your loved one can go and spend the day. They have substance abuse teams there to help them with co-occurring issues and so forth. And that might be a proper level of treatment for your loved one. They may need, and they also have, number one, they also have psychiatrists or nurse practitioners there. Number two, assisted outpatient treatment, AOT. We're going to hear more about that later from Linda from the Department of Mental Health, who's with us here today. It is basically where they can get help and assistance and treatment for their mental illness, and it may be that that's a more appropriate, or they just don't quite qualify for conservatorship. They don't meet the criteria of being gravely disabled. And last, LPS conservatorship is involuntary treatment, and that's for those that are meeting the requirement of being gravely disabled. They're not properly able to dress themselves, feed themselves, or live safely. And that's what we're talking about today, is the number three, getting that LPS conservatorship lined up. So let's look at the next slide. You want to use the written case, and that is what we talked about prior, and how to organize that written information. You want to use that same information and take it with you when you reach out and apply for SSI, SSDI, or Medi-Cal, or whenever you call the police. Let's say that your loved one has become unstable. You've called a psychiatric team to come. When they arrive at your house, it's so important to have that single piece of paper at the ready. In fact, we always say, you know what? Take some, hide it in the lining of the trunk of your car, or under the seat of your car in your house. Keep a copy at work. Keep a copy everywhere, so that when your loved one destabilizes, you'll have access to that information, and it will be very, very beneficial in getting your loved one hospitalized when they in fact need that hospitalization. If you request AOT, full service partnership, or an LPS conservatorship, it's imperative to have this information on their mental health. And if you're talking with a social worker at jail, you want to be sure to give them a copy of that as well, and ask them to forward that information to the treating doctor. By the way, if your loved one's going to be in jail long enough, you can actually get an LPS in jail. Have it initiated. The criminal court for public defender, absolutely. I've worked with families. I've gone to court with them, on one occasion, I should say, and made sure that they brought that information along and spoke with the public defender and explained how that loved one committed this crime at a time that they were mentally unstable, and that helped immensely. If they're in a mental health court, again, want to use that written case in all of these kind of scenarios. It's such a valuable tool. Next slide.
When you're hospitalizing a person, if the person is a flight risk or he's a threat to others or themselves, you want to call 911. And I think now they have a new number. I forgot what it is.
988.
Lewis, do you know what it is? Lewis? Oh,
Yeah,
I believe it's 988.
988. That's what
That's
it was.
correct.
I couldn't think. Yeah. But if they're going to do something, if they are gravely disabled and they're not a flight risk, you can call the access team, and the number's that 800 number. But it might take them a little bit longer to get to your house. It could take them a day or two, because when schools are in session, if the school calls them, they have to divert and go to them first. So, but that history, symptoms, and gravely disabled, which is about 3 pages that you put together, have that and be quietly give it to the police. Tell the police what's going on. That helps them to write up a stronger case to do a 5150, which is the term used to get them in the hospital. And you want them to go to the hospital, not jail, because jail, we can still get them treatment, but I'd rather them be in the hospital. It's a little bit nicer and it's easier on you mentally. Still stressful, any way you look at it. The other thing is, have 3 open-ended questions that they can use when the police come, because the police sometimes will come and say, are you going to hurt yourself? No. Are you going to hurt anybody else? No. Well, they don't meet the criteria. There's nothing we can do. We had a case in San Bernardino. They did exactly that. The police asked them. The family had been calling saying, we need help. After the police left, a few hours later, the young man goes into the family's room, parents' room. He's got a knife, axe, few other goodies, and he tries to kill the parents. And he says, Dad, you've got to die. I can't take you to heaven if you don't die. Was he going to hurt anybody? No, he's taking his dad to heaven. I mean, that's just their thinking is that way. So of course he's not going to hurt anybody in his mind. So have 3 open-ended questions. Like, let's say they feel the FBI or CIA or somebody's following them. You say, I understand, give this to the policeman to ask them. I understand the FBI or CIA or somebody's following you. How can we help you with that situation? Now they will tend to talk. If that one doesn't work, have another one. I understand your parents have taken all your money. They owe you $1 million. How can we help you with that situation? If that one doesn't work, you have a third question. Use that when the police come, give it to the police, because many of you will say, well, when they come, they're so articulate, they really can answer these questions. They know how to avoid it because they're smart. God bless you if you have a smart one, and most of them are. They know what to say and what not to say. So if you give these to the police, they can ask them. Now the unreality comes into play, and they'll start talking and tell them whatever the situation may be. That's why you don't ever argue with them on anything. When you go to the court, mental health court, have those 3 questions, because they'll get up there and they'll say, Your Honor, I can do this, this, and this. There's no reason for this LPS. But when the county council starts asking them questions, open-ended questions, they totally fall apart on that. They're not in touch with reality. Those are really important. And even in the hospital, the same thing. Okay, next slide. To get the person hospitalized, these are the terminologies. You're going to hear a lot of this. 5150s, also known as your 3-day hold or your 72-hour hold. When the person, when you've given that history, symptoms, and gravely disabled information to the police, don't assume the police have taken it to the hospital. Most likely they haven't. So you go to the emergency room, you ask who's going to evaluate this person, and you give them that information. That's why Jim says you have several of these to go. Then they'll put them on a 3-day hold. After the 3-day hold, they go on a 5250, which is a 14-day hold. Now, if you're asking the doctor to initiate the LPS conservatorship, generally they will not do that till after what they call a probable cause hearing, or also known as a certification hearing. And that takes place within the first 4 working days of that 14-day hold. Now, hospitals count the weekend now as working days. They used to not do that, but they do it now. So within the first 4 days on that 14-day hold, they will have a probable cause hearing or certification hearing right at the hospital. That paper that you have given to the doctor helps the doctor to make a stronger case to keep them in the hospital for up to the full 14 days. But good luck if they keep them a full 14 days. They don't. Usually day 12, 13, they're dismissing them from the hospital, discharging them. So that you want to do. Now, some counties, LA County and Orange County, I believe Orange County, has a 5270, which is also a 30-day hold, an additional 30-day hold. If the doctor's going to initiate the LPS conservatorship, they can do it within that first 5 days of that 30-day hold. The reason they don't do it after that, the public guardian has a lot of work to do. They have to do investigations, write things up, present it, and get a court case date. So if it's after that, they can't do it. On the 14-day hold, if they're going to initiate it, it should be right after that probable cause hearing. And if the doctor initiates it after the probable cause hearing, I'm giving y'all a lot of information, but you can call us anytime you need to. They're placed on a TCON, a temporary conservatorship, for 30 days. That court hearing has to be heard within that 30 days, unless the judge makes a ruling and says a little bit otherwise. So within that 30 days, you're going to have your LPS conservatorship hearing. Okay, next slide. How to acquire the LPS. You don't acquire it. Now, there's 2 conservatorships in California. One is probate, which is for everybody who does not have a serious mental illness. A serious mental illness would be schizophrenia, schizoid affective, bipolar, chronic depression. And Lewis is going to talk about a new law that will hopefully be passed, which might include a few more. LPS is specific for those with mental health. If you go to an attorney and he's going to say, oh yeah, I'll get you a conservatorship, most likely they will apply for the probate conservatorship. Then when they get to court, you've paid them money for this case. Excuse me. You paid them money. The judge will have to dismiss the case because it's in the wrong venue. This isn't mental health. That belongs in mental health court, not in probate court. So you want to be careful with that. And that's why I say put your money away. It is the treating doctor at the hospital and at the jail who can initiate the LPS conservatorships. And if they choose not to, it's pretty hard to get them to change their mind. Now, in Los Angeles, we have a home team, and they have a program when somebody's living on the street. And we're going to have somebody talk about that next time at the next LPS meeting. They can initiate the LPS conservatorship. They have all the criteria that they need and the personnel to be able to get this done. It's a pilot project in Los Angeles, and right now it's not doing poorly. It's doing pretty good. Okay, next. When the person is in the hospital, you give that written case to the treating doctor. Don't assume somebody else has given it to the doctor. You can give it to the social worker and ask the social worker to give it to the doctor. And you ask the doctor to initiate the LPS conservatorship with the public guardian's office. Time is of the essence. If you're at the end of the 14-day hold, unless they're going to do a 30-day hold, there's nothing you can really do. So time is of the essence when they go in the hospital. In jail, it's a little bit different, but if they're going to release the person from jail in 2 days, there's no way that doctor's going to initiate that, because they need that time to follow through with the investigation and get a court date. All right, next slide.
So you can actually, as I mentioned earlier, obtain an LPS while your loved one's in jail. And of course, there has to be sufficient time. If they're in there for a misdemeanor, obviously they're not going to be held in jail long enough to initiate it. So in a case where you have a more serious charge against them, you can reach out to the hospital and talk to their doctor, reach out to the jail and talk to their doctors in there and request that they initiate the LPS conservatorship. So you want to give that treating doctor your written case for treatment. And of course, you should request a public defender to ask the mental health liaison to be involved in the case. You should also ask the public defender to request a jail diversion program. So these are all things that you want to do when your loved one has been arrested and if they in fact are needing to be on a conservatorship. These are things that you can actually do to move that forward. Next slide. So the California Welfare Institution Code 5008.2 requires that all healthcare providers shall take your information and that the historical course of the person must be taken into account for treatment. So in other words, the CAT team is there. You ask them to accept the information that you've created, that special, one-page document. They are required by law to accept that. I will share a brief time with you that I actually got called at midnight, but I just went along with it. And the family was telling me that the CAT team was not accepting that information. I had to go back through channels the following day and get those individuals re-educated. It's a requirement of law that they accept that information, and they must consider that information to make a final determination whether or not your loved one meets criteria for hospitalization. Mental illness itself, this is actually the next paragraph. It was something that was put together by Carla Jacobs of Orange County. And basically what she was saying was that mental illness does not exist in a vacuum of time, that the illness itself will wax and wane, where they'll present well at one time and then they exhibit psychotic symptoms at other times. And so primarily it may be that when your loved one meets criteria and so forth, is put into the hospital, that they've kind of recycled to a point that when the doctor comes to assess them, they look really well. And the doctor would perhaps think that, gee, this individual has such clarity of mind, they may not meet criteria. However, upon looking at the written information that you have provided to them, you can make a better determination of what your loved one's needs actually are or are not. Next slide. Criteria for conservatorship. The LPS conservatorship is California's involuntary mental health treatment for recovery. They must have both a very serious mental illness and they must also be gravely disabled. So in other words, what is a serious illness? And we'll cover, I think, a slide on one of these, but things like schizophrenia, not just depression, but bipolar, schizoaffective, those types of things. If they're found to have that and they're, because of that illness, they're meeting the criteria of gravely disabled, being unable to provide for food, clothing, and shelter, then they would meet criteria for an LPS conservatorship. So it helps a person with no insight into their illness, that their illness is that they are non-compliant with treatment and medication. So must have both a serious mental illness and be gravely disabled in order to meet criteria for LPS conservatorship. Next slide. These are, I touched on. The last one is chronic alcoholism. To my knowledge, no one is going to move forward with a conservatorship based on somebody having a chronic alcoholic condition. I've seen it come close to that, where they actually went through a process and they kind of went through an AOT process for compliance. So there's always alternatives. But if they're bipolar, if they have schizophrenia, schizoaffective, they have clinical depression where they just cannot function at that point, or they have obsessive compulsive disorder. These are all kind of the levels of serious illness that are needing to be in place for a conservatorship. As Gail mentioned earlier, you don't want to mention that, oh yes, they take drugs, they have an addiction to methamphetamine, they have a severe alcoholic drinking problem. You don't want to go there. They'll be able to test them in the hospital, and they're going to, in the meantime, have enough information at hand to move forward with hospitalization if in fact they meet criteria. Next slide. Yeah.
The types of conservatorship. This is types of LPS conservatorship. The conservatorship of the person is the treating doctor in the hospital or the jail initiates with the public guardian's office the request for the LPS conservatorship of the person. There's one of the estate, which it's the public guardian. You would talk to them if you need it, like if they owe debts, they have criminal court cases, they have school loans that need to be dealt with. And school loans you can somewhat get waived. There's a process you have to go through on that. But anything that would require their estate, not that they have money, but if they have court cases or they owe money, and some people do have money, but many don't, you can request it of the estate to handle that. Now, when the person is in the hospital, if they're receiving SSI and they're handling their own money, you can ask the doctor to fill out the form for you to be representative payee. You don't need your loved one's permission for that. You give that to the Social Security office and you open up a bank account, a representative payee account in both your name and your loved one's name. It will be reported as their income, but only you will have access to that money, which is to be used directly for them, for their housing, their food, whatever. So that's an important thing to have. Probably one of the easiest things you can get through is that representative payee account, and the money is direct deposit in that bank. So that's something, you don't need a conservatorship for that. But that conservatorship of the estate, if you need that, talk to the public guardian, run a credit check, Credit Karma, you know what their Social Security number is. Run a credit check, that will tell you what money they owe. You can tell the public guardian, okay, this is what they owe to whomever, and it needs to be dealt with. It doesn't, you do not pay with your money. You are not liable if you choose to be the conservator. You're not liable for anything they do or they don't do. Now, with that said, if they will basically suspend their right to drive a car. But if you give them the keys to the car and ask them to go get a gallon of milk and they have an accident, you are liable because they were not supposed to be driving. But if they took the keys to the car without your permission and they had an accident, you are not liable. So those are some little things to know and to be aware of. So as the doctor will initiate it of the person, if you need it of the estate also, then you talk to the public guardian. You cannot have it of the estate unless they have it of the person. You can have it always of the person without the estate, but not the estate without the person. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Probate conservatorship is usually for older people who have a mental illness, but it also can be for younger people. If you have a stroke, TBI, brain illness, autism, anything else, that is probate. Borderline personality disorder, that's probate at this time. Now, these things may change because they're really talking about a lot of things in the legislation. And I strongly suggest you keep in touch with your legislator and let them know what you need so that they vote appropriately. And if they're not voting the way you want them to vote them out of office. Next slide. The conservatee's loss of right. When a person is conserved, remember what I said at the beginning, the essence of the LPS is to mandate medication. They take away their right to refuse medication. As long as they're under the LPS, they cannot refuse medication. If they do, we have a process to get them back in treatment. That's tomorrow's class. They temporarily suspend their right to enter contracts, drive a car, the right to possess and own guns. That is more federal, but it's also the state. They cannot have a gun. They cannot possess a gun or anything. They cannot go out shooting if the dad likes to go shooting with them. They cannot do that while they're under conservatorship. Now, the right to drive a car and enter contracts, they can have that reinstated while they are under the LPS conservatorship. They might be getting a job and need their car to go drive for that job. Or they might need to be able to enter contracts to sign people up for different things. So those are only temporarily suspended. Now, if the public guardian is the conservator, they most likely will not allow them either of those because it can be a liability for the public guardian. But for you, it is not. Okay, and there's a process to get the right to drive a car and all those things through. That's tomorrow's class. Okay, next. The rights of the conservator. If you choose to be the conservator, your right is to approve or disapprove treatment, placement, and medication. You don't have to run around looking for a place for them to go. The county has the intensive care division, will go to the hospital, they will do an evaluation of your loved one, and they will talk with the doctor and with you too, if you're the conservator, and determine the best facility for your loved one. Now, as a conservator, you can go and check these facilities out. You know your loved one better than anybody. So you can go and say, oh, that's a great place, that's gonna work. I'm concerned about that one because of certain things. For instance, one young man didn't like anybody close to them. If you were within 6 feet of that person, you're in my space. Why are you in my space? The facility, they were jammed in like sardines. He said, no, this is not going to work. And you want to ask a lot of questions on these treatment facilities. When it comes to medication, be sure and sign up for the free NAMI class, family to family class. Very empowering. It'll help you an awful lot. They have one section on medications and it's excellent. Now, this is my opinion. I'm not a doctor, psychiatrist, or any such thing. I've just been doing this a long time. If you have a migraine headache and I have a headache and I give you my Tylenol for your migraine, it isn't going to phase your migraine. It's the same. You have mental health and you have serious mental illness. If I give you the medication that would help somebody with a mental health problem, chances are it's not going to phase your serious mental illness. The medications that, and I'm just sharing you the results that I get from other people. Invega tends to work a lot for people. Now, what works for one doesn't work for another. So it is trial and error to figure out what's going to work. And you're working with the treating doctor. You can't tell the doctor, I want you to give them this medication he'll tell you, oh no, you're not the doctor, so you're out of here. But you can tell the doctor, I've been reading this medication. What do you think if we try it? And then I can give you feedback what I'm seeing with my loved one. Because remember, you know what they're supposed to be like. Don't settle. A doctor will give a medication, they're doped up. Oh, well, they're not a problem. They're doing okay. They're zombies. You don't want that. You want them back as close as you possibly can to what they were like before they got ill. So the medications that tend to give the greatest probability for success would be Invega, that's Invega, Caplyta, Caplyta, that's a relatively new one, and it works on cell therapy. I must sound intelligent, but honestly, I have no idea what that's all about. Vraylar helps on negative symptoms of schizophrenia. That's V as in Victor, Raylar. That's Vraylar. Those tend to help a lot of people, but keep in mind, it may not, none of those may help your loved one, but you have a good probability of that. Work with the doctors on these. Treatment, when they go to a treatment facility, you want to know, ask them what therapy they have, what classes, what programs, what do they do, and get it in writing. And when they go to a treatment facility, do not sign your rights away as your conservator. They'll have you sign a paper saying that you're giving them permission to treat, do all this other stuff. As far as that facility is concerned, chances are you're out the door. You've given us the permission. Write specifically, and Jim tells you on that, get a fine point pen and write. Any change in treatment, placement, and medication must have your expressed written permission. Very important. We talk about that tomorrow too. Okay, next slide.
I would like to make a point before we go to the next
Okay.
slide. And how, once you're a conservator, yes, you are going to be, as Gail has well covered, the right to approve or disapprove of these 3 items that are on your screen at the moment. I just wanted to share with you that here in Orange County, some of our hospitals have sort of a bad habit of transferring people under conservatorships out of their hospital during a 5150 to another location. And oftentimes that's to Long Beach, that's out of the county altogether, out to LA and everything else. I actually had our son in the hospital and provided them, handed them, right there in the emergency room, the conservatorship papers, or copies of them rather, from the court. And without my permission, behind my back, they moved him out to a hospital in Torrance. It's a hospital that one of the former public guardians and I had discussed at length, and that it really wasn't a very good facility. And it wasn't really a good facility for somebody on conservatorship. When I found out that they had moved our son, I called the hospital here in Orange County and I said, you're in violation of law. You can't do that. And once I got it across to them that I really did give them the paperwork, they were instrumental in getting my son out of that hospital, and they actually moved him back to Anaheim. Whoops, I slipped. Back to the Orange County Hospital. But stand your guard on this. Don't let people run over the top of you. There's a lot of families down in South County here in Orange County that have experienced this, and they moved their loved one on conservatorship without their approval, was transferred to Long Beach, and then they were transferred to Culver City. And my gosh, the journey to go from one point to the other just to do a visitation was almost impossible. So stand your right. Don't allow them to get away with this. All right, next slide. So who should be the conservator? A lot of people are new to this. They don't know if they want to be a conservator or not. The public guardian in the county in which you live can be the conservator, and they can do all of this for you. The pro would be that they would be able to place the person in a state-approved facility. There's less stress for the family member. You don't have somebody, nagging you and pressuring you to do all sorts of things that you should not do for them. The negative is that there's less involvement with the recovery process. You have no control over what medications they're on or anything else. So you have to just kind of sit back and let somebody run with all that and hope that it works out for your son or daughter's or family member's best interest. But you want to work, you would work to establish a working relationship with a public guardian. They have privacy laws. They can't just tell you everything. So you try to at least have a working relationship with them. Next slide. So the other side of the coin is, well, gosh, maybe I should be the conservator. So the upshot of that is that you'll have direct contact with the doctor. If they're hospitalized, you'll know what hospital they've been placed into. You can reject inappropriate treatment facilities, medications, or treatment places. I know there have been times when families call me and they're not on conservatorship and their loved one's hospitalized and the doctor's giving them medications that they are trying to convince the doctor that that's just not a good medication, for legitimate reasons, and they weren't being listened to. If you're the conservator, you can say you will not put them on that medication and why they will not be, should not be placed on that medication. But let's say you are the conservator and it's established that, okay, now you have this title of I'm a conservator. The downside is that your conservator is always going to be manipulating you. Maybe they have a desire to own things that it would not be good for them to own, or something that they want to eat, or they want to take some stimulant or something, and they're pressuring you all the time for you to get that for them or give them money so they can go buy it. It's a lot of pressure. The hospital will try to push you around when they're in the hospital, and they'll try to discharge the patient to a facility not appropriate for their level of treatment that's actually needed for their recovery. So it's a lot of work being a conservator, but then you have the oversight to see that things go the way they should go, for somebody that you love so dearly. So pros and cons of being a conservator. Next slide. In a court hearing, the patient is assigned a public defender. The patient can request that the court make a final decision on whether or not they would be placed onto a conservatorship by a judge, or the patient can request a jury trial. And believe me, when they are put into a hospital and we're trying to initiate the conservatorship process, and it's going from the doctor supporting that, and they reach out to the public guardian's office, and then county council gets involved, and now we're having this hearing scheduled in a mental health court. All the time that your loved one is waiting to be moved to that court trial, they have what's called, patients' rights. It's part of the Welfare Institution Code here in California, and they're educating them quite thoroughly that if you don't want that judge to make a final decision, you can always ask a jury trial. You might have a better result there. So these are kind of things that actually will take place and can take place, one versus the other. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Mental Health Court, Department A, has been relocated to Norwalk Boulevard, and that's in Norwalk. So be sure if you're having a rehearing and you're going there. Now they're still doing WebEx, to my understanding. So be sure that you go to Norwalk, because it went from, this is about the fourth time in about 20 years it's been changed. So the last one was in Hollywood. You don't want to show up in Hollywood and go, where are they? They're over in Norwalk. Judge Scott Herron is the judge. He will be speaking later on today. And I have heard nothing but good things about him. Not all mental health court judges are that in tune to mental health, but I've heard just everybody says really wonderful things about him. So we are blessed that we've got a good judge. Next slide. After the LPS is granted, basically the hospital should be holding the patient until a proper facility is located. They should contact the intensive care division, ICD, and request an evaluation of the patient. So you want to be sure that they do this. The level of care that your loved one needs is determined by a clinical recommendation. The most intense place would be what they call an IMD, an Institute for Mental Disease. It is a lockdown treatment facility. Now, with that said, it isn't locked down forever because they want to start to work the person to go back out in the community. But until they get clarity of thinking and they're not a flight risk, then the hospital will be in a lockdown facility. But you could pick, if you're a conservator, you can go pick them up for lunch, take them out a little shopping, different things like that. You can go visit them in the facility and have lunch with them in the facility if you like. Each facility has their own rules and regulations. As they get better, they can be transferred from an IMD to an enhanced residential setting, which is a secure facility. They sign in and out. It's not locked. And then they could go to a board and care, sober living, outpatient treatment. They could go to an apartment or with you. Now, while they are in the hospital, let's say the LPS is granted. While they're in the hospital, if they find a good medication that's really working for them, giving them clarity of thinking, they're really getting their life together. Because to get an IMD, you're looking at maybe 4 months, approximately, give or take. It was like 13 at one time. But if they get better, they might be able to skip that IMD and go to the enhanced residential setting, which does a lot of therapy, a lot of treatment, or they could even skip that and go to a board and care. Any of these facilities, if you are the conservator, investigate the facility, tour it, see what they offer. Don't let them say, like one facility said, well, we have a library. Got there and I'm looking, there are 3 books in this one room and a desk. That's your library, and it said over the door, library. That's bogus. That's not a library. So you want to investigate and find out, make sure these people are doing what they say they're willing to do. Are they going to work with the family member? Do they have monthly family meetings so that you know how your loved one's progressing? That sort of thing. And can you talk directly with the doctor? If you can't, I would be sure that's written on that contract. When you need it, you don't do it all the time, but when you need it, you have direct contact with the doctor. Okay, next slide. Suggestions for recovery. The big thing when that LPS is granted, go get the family album, look at it, and remember what your loved one what he was like or she was like prior to their illness. That is the level of recovery that I'd like for you to seek. You might not get exactly there, but you're going to get pretty darn close. The medications, be familiar with all their medications. I've had people call me after their loved one's been in the hospital for a year. They're still hearing voices. They're doing this and they're doing that. And they're the conservator. You need to change that medication. It's not working for them. And usually when I find out what medications they have, they're on the medications for a person who has a mental health problem, not a serious mental illness. Therapy, cognitive therapy is very important. It's sort of like your muscles. If you've laid in bed for a month, then you try to get up and walk. God bless you. Yeah, I doubt if you're going to be able to. Your brain's been mush for a while. You need to work it out and get it going again. Cognitive therapy helps to exercise the brain power. So that you want. If they need addiction treatment, now you can talk about addiction treatment. then you definitely want them in substance abuse treatment. Okay, next slide. Okay, be sure to take that free family to family class. It is very empowering. And join NAMI, become a member of NAMI. It's a club that you really wish you never knew about, but boy, are you glad you do. You will learn so much, and they offer so many wonderful things. Join NAMI, get involved. They need teachers to teach those classes, those free family to family classes. You don't get paid, but you are involved. Help other people, give guidance. If you want to do what Jim and I do, call us. We'll educate you. We'll be thrilled to educate you so that people can call you and ask for guidance. They have family support groups that you can do, and they train you for all this. You don't just walk in and say, oh, what do I do? They train you. If you just work in the office to help out, that helps an awful lot, but get involved. Next slide.
And I would, on the last slide, and stay right here on this slide, but on the last slide, join your mental health board meetings in your community. They're a place and a platform where you can go and voice your needs and lack of needs maybe that the county is providing. So find out where those are and when they are. And I know here in Orange County, you can attend either in person, or you can go directly to the meetings. On this slide, we're talking about tips again, and this is so incredibly important. I'll tell you, there have been times when I didn't keep it in my journal, and boy, did I resent it. So actually get a designated journal and keep, a list of all the people that you've talked to about your loved ones. What you talked to the doctor on this date. These are the medications that he started on that date, and so forth and on down, and page after page. When they're in the hospital, out of the hospital, and just keep a running journal, a running track record of all the people that you've talked to and all the different places that your loved one is in and out of. It's so important. It makes just a world of difference. And as Gail always says, keep a sense of humor. Sometimes I wonder, because it's not easy. And there are times when you have smooth sailing and it's just a breeze, and then all of a sudden it hits the fan, and that's what we talked about earlier, when things ebb and wane. That is so true with mental health. So you have to keep a sense of humor. It's kind of goes back to what I always refer to as being in a jet with a little tiny, 7-year-old child. And if suddenly the cabin pressure, depressurizes because of a blown window or something, before you put the mask on, the 7-year-old child, you put it on yourself. Otherwise, you might pass out, and then neither one of you have the oxygen. So you have to really keep a good sense of humor, keep a sense of balance. Don't let things get you down. Find people that you can go to and talk with. NAMI meetings are a great place. If you can't find anyone in your neighborhood, go to the NAMI meetings. But don't let this pull you down. You have to really stay strong for your loved ones. They depend on you. And if you're going to become depressed and down and out, it's just not going to be very helpful for your loved ones. So this is a very important message. Keep a sense of humor. Next slide.
Yeah. Wait, can I just add on that journal? Keep 2 journals. One is comments your loved ones say. Keep it by your nightstand at night. And at night, write in it, what did they say? What medications are they on? That's really important to help them to get on the road to recovery. Different things that they're doing and saying, that helps a lot.
Right.
The other journal, and this is really important, you write down everybody you talk to, including if you call me or Jim. Write down what we say. Of course, we say a lot, so you might just put LPS information pertaining to whatever. But the social worker at the hospital, the doctor, the police, different people, because sometimes people will call me and they'll say, well, the social worker said this. Well, they have a lot of different social workers. Who said it? We have to know. We can correct what people are saying, the things that aren't true. We just had one hospital just the other day, but I don't know who it was because the lady didn't know. She didn't keep her journal. Tell her that we cannot take your information, that's the new law. I called Linda Boyd and I said, Linda, have you heard about this law? She hadn't heard about it. That's bogus. So the other thing is you say to them, show me the law. When you're talking to people, don't get stressed. You got enough of that on your plate. If somebody's telling you something you don't like, either ask them to tell you where that is in that California Welfare and Institutions Code, or ask to talk to their supervisor. Write down names and numbers. And I'm going to give you a really good case. This was up north now, in Northern California. God bless them on getting mental health treatment. The young man called a friend, said he was going to get a gun and go shoot the police. So the family calls the police to have it. They're not telling him that that's who he wants to shoot, but to get him in the hospital. Starting at the bottom of the barrel, well, ma'am, unless he does something, there's nothing we can do. Okay, I need to speak to your supervisor. Went on up the chain of command, got to the chief of police, and he says, well, ma'am, there's nothing we can do until he does something. The lady says, well, you know, I've written down everybody I've talked to in your department, what they say, and their contact information. Smart, he's going to be able to get a gun and he's going to be able to do something. And when he does, she kept her cool. I'm going to give all this information to the media and to the victims' families. It will be interesting to see how you spin that. Okay, we're going to go get them, and they put them in the hospital and they got an LPS conservatorship on them. You have to use your brain. You know what your goal is, what you need. So think about it, keep calm, don't get all riled up and start yelling. And if you do, you're only human. So don't blame yourself. But you do try to do this. And the more you practice, the better off you'll be. 2 journals, one on your loved one and one on everybody you talk to. And keep that sense of humor. When your kid's throwing your dinner in the garbage disposal because they don't think it's good, oh, well, I guess maybe you're not the best cook in the world. Next. I think we're done.
We're done.
Oh my God.
Think
Louis.
So Louis is next. 1 second.
Louis is next. Wow, Louis, we're giving you extra time.
Yeah, I'm going to need it, I think, Gail. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Louis is head of the public guardian's office now, the supervisor. And everybody that I have had them call him for a particular reason, they call me back and they say, he is the nicest, most helpful person. Now, until the doctor initiates that LPS conservatorship, Louis really, their hands are tied what they can do. But there's sometimes where we need his suggestions and advice. And he is, we can't ask for better. We're thrilled with him. And thank you, Louis, for all you do for us.
Thank you so much, Gail. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending today. As Gail mentioned, my name is Luis Leiva. I am the current acting deputy director with the Office of the Public Guardian. Today's training is going to be a basic, it's going to be basic information on how to obtain or what the process looks like in obtaining an LPS conservatorship. As Gail mentioned earlier, there are 2 types of conservatorships in the state of California. One of them is a probate conservatorship, which is mainly for your elderly, demented adults. That conservatorship, once established, is for the remainder of that individual's life. The conservatorship process we're going to focus on today is the LPS conservatorship. That conservatorship needs to be renewed on a yearly basis. So happy to be here today, and hopefully we can provide you some information that would help guide you through this process that can seem a bit complex. But if after my presentation there are any questions, or during the presentation there are any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat, and my colleague Linda Boyd is available to answer any questions for me while I talk through the slides. Okay, so again, happy to be here, and we'll get started. Today's training objectives are to provide an overview of the Office of the Public Guardian, provide an overview of the conservatorship, the intent, the purposes, and the types of conservatorships. And again, our main focus will be on the LPS conservatorship. What conservatorship services are available? We'll discuss inpatient referrals, which are the ones that come from our designated hospitals. We'll also expand on what Gail touched on regarding the home teams and our outpatient conservatorship process. Okay, we'll also talk a little bit as to what are our responsibilities once public guardian becomes conservator. We'll discuss a bit about forensic cases. Forensic cases in general are individuals who are referred for conservatorship because they are criminal justice involved. These are your individuals who are currently in custody or are going through a criminal case where the courts determine that they want public guardian to conduct investigations as to the suitability of an LPS conservatorship as an alternative to sentencing. Okay, we'll also talk a little bit about the CARE Act. That is the new care court that is going to be implemented later this year, and it kicks off December 1st in LA County. We'll touch a little bit about what that entails. And as Gail and Jim mentioned earlier, we'll also discuss briefly the new efforts for redefining grave disability and what that would mean moving forward and its impact on conservatorship if it passes legislation. Okay, next. Before we get into this slide, I want to reemphasize that the process that I'm going to be speaking to today is applicable to LA County. Okay, even though the laws under the Welfare and Institutions Code are the same for all counties throughout the state, the process that I'm talking about in my presentation is the process that is followed in LA County. It varies in minor ways from county to county. This one specifically for LA County. Okay. Okay. The Office of the Public Guardian. The Public Guardian is the designated county conservatorship investigator for all LPS conservatorships. Okay. Unlike the probate conservatorship, all LPS conservatorships are referred to the Public Guardian's office, and we are the sole entity responsible for conducting independent investigations and making recommendations to the court as to whether or not conservatorship meets the criteria under the code, and if we have the clinical evidence to support the establishment of a conservatorship for a client. Okay. Referrals can be accepted or rejected by the public guardian in certain occasions, not too frequently. We do get referrals where individuals are not an LA County resident. Okay. Unfortunately, let's take the example of a gentleman who picked up charges in LA County or ended up being 5150'd in LA County for some reason, but yet it is determined that he was here temporarily and is actually a resident of one of our neighboring counties. We would ask that the neighboring county, the county of residence, would be the responsible entity for establishing the conservatorship in that county. Okay. In another reason why we would reject the referral is that it ultimately lacks the evidence of grave disability. Okay. This is key for the doctors who complete the referrals for conservatorship. Okay. And this is where Gail and Jim's instructions in passing along the historical information to the treatment providers is critical in obtaining the possible evidence to move forward on the case. Okay. Grave disability is required to be in the present time, right? That the individual needs to be gravely disabled today. What happened 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or even last week may not present the evidence necessary that they're gravely disabled as of the filing of this case. Okay. So again, but the historical aspect of it is something that needs to be considered. Okay, and it is one of the responsibilities of the public guardian investigator to gather as much information as possible. So those journals that Gail and Jim are referring to are extremely helpful to our investigators to kind of create a historical picture for the court. Okay. Now, again, in essence, the court's going to want to know that that individual is greatly disabled presently. However, whatever historical information we can get from the family assists greatly in creating our case. Okay. In some cases, we get an incomplete referral where it's missing the doctor's signatures or some other key elements that are necessary to support the filing of the case. In those cases, we'll work as much as we can with the referring party to get those referrals corrected. But as Gail mentioned earlier, we're under a very strict time frame. Okay, we need to file the necessary legal documents with the court, and we cannot go beyond the 30-day involuntary hold time frame. So we need to have a hearing prior to the end of the 30-day involuntary hold period. So the sooner we can get the corrections completed or a thorough referral, that allows us for the time necessary for us to conduct our investigation, allow county counsel to prepare the petition for filing. It allows the court to schedule that hearing within that 30-day time frame. Okay. In some cases, unfortunately, referrals are being handwritten by the treating doctor. And as we all know, most doctors do not have the best handwriting, and sometimes we have to kick it back to the hospitals in order for them to give us an electronic referral because the doctor's writing is just not legible. Okay. Over the past 3-4 years, there has been a large increase in justice-involved clients for defendants who were found to be incompetent to stand trial. I've been with the Office of the Public Guardian going on 14 years. And I can tell you in the last 3 to 4 years, I've seen a huge increase in the referrals that we're getting out of the jails or in orders by either the criminal courts or the competency courts for defendants that are facing charges. Okay. Next slide. So what is a conservatorship? It is a court proceeding to appoint a legally responsible person for someone who is unable to provide for his or her personal needs or properly manage his or her finances. Okay. As mentioned, there are 3 types of conservatorships. The LPS that we'll be focused on today, the probate one that I mentioned earlier for your older adults with major neurocognitive disorders. And there's a housing conservatorship that was approved by the state about 3 years ago. That is a conservatorship that LA County has not implemented within our county. Okay. Next slide. Okay, it is a civil proceeding requiring proof of need and attendance by involved persons. Okay. I know the court allows for remote testimony in Judge Herron's courtroom in all initial hearings. He would prefer that the client be present in court. Okay. The judge is very involved, and it gives him an opportunity to meet the client and to see for himself and to discuss the case directly with the client. Okay. Those that are being conserved are represented by the public defender's office. In very few cases, they can obtain their own private counsel to represent them. But in most of the cases in LA County, they are represented by the public defender. Okay. The public defender's role is pretty straightforward. It is to articulate the wishes of the client. And if the client does not wish to be conserved, that public defender will request that a contested hearing take place, either through a court trial or a jury trial. Okay, next slide. Okay, the LPS, what is the LPS Act? What was its intent and purposes? Okay. And the LPS Act was implemented to end the inappropriate, indefinite, and involuntary commitment of individuals. Okay, prior to the LPS Act, there was no due process rights for individuals who were committed to mental health institutions. The LPS Act came into play as a byproduct of the civil rights movement, and it made involuntary treatment of mentally ill individuals more strict and provided for the strict court oversight, granting patients due process rights. Okay. It was established to provide prompt evaluation and treatment, to provide for individualized treatment, supervision, and placement to meet each individual's needs. Okay. To safeguard individuals' rights through judicial review, to provide services in the least restrictive setting based on that individual's needs. Okay. It establishes procedures for involuntary treatment as well. All right, next slide. The effects of a conservatorship can vary, but in essence, it shifts the responsibility for making personal care and financial decisions from the mentally ill client to the court-appointed conservator. Okay. This is an awesome responsibility that the court is granting on another individual. Okay. Most of us take for granted our ability to make decisions for ourselves as to what we eat, what medications we take, where we live, what doctors we choose to treat us. In essence, those individuals who are imposed a conservatorship lose those rights. Okay. It imposes upon the client significant limitations on his or her civil rights, such as where to live, the mental health treatment they can accept or refuse, execution of contracts, management of personal finances, and in some cases, physical health decisions as well. Okay. And why is that necessary? Because unfortunately, those that are severely mentally ill lack the capacity to make those decisions to their best interests. Okay. However, despite these restrictions, conservatorship may provide the best guarantee of protection of the client's interests. Okay. And that comes to play as well with the court oversight. Okay. The conservator does not have just carte blanche to make any decision whatsoever. There is a process by which ultimately our decisions will be reviewed by the court, and in many cases will answer to the court if decisions are not made correctly. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so LPS conservatorship encompasses there's a lot of moving parts that need to be considered prior to moving forward on a case, and it involves a multitude of people. The driving force behind the conservatorship, as Gail and Jim mentioned earlier, is the treating doctor. Without the treating doctor's collaboration, in essence, we're dead in the water in proving our case in court. Okay. Next slide. And why are the doctors so key? The doctors are key is because they're the ones that are going to provide the clinical testimony to support a case, not only in written form by completing the referral to conduct the investigation, but also at the time of the contested hearing or during a jury trial. Okay. All right. So an LPS inpatient conservatorship process usually begins with an individual being placed into a designated facility, which is an acute psychiatric hospital on the 72-hour hold. Okay. So again, the 72-hour hold, also known as a 5150 hold. If the person is unable to be stabilized and reintegrated into the community safely, the treatment team after the 5150 hold or during the 5150 hold will make a determination that they need additional time to reach stabilization. The acute hospitals have the right to make that determination and implement and execute a 14-day hold, which is known as the 5250. around the 5250 timeframe, the treating staff will have a good sense on whether or not an individual will ultimately be referred for conservatorship. Okay, it is during this period where we need the advocacy of the family to work with the treatment team in an effort to convince them to refer for conservatorship. Okay, all right. And again, if needed, the person can be placed on an additional 30-day intensive hold, also known as the 5270. If the treatment team refers the case to the public guardian, either during the 14-day hold or during the initial days of the 30-day hold, we will file that case with the court and obtain what we call a TCON, or a temporary conservatorship. What does that temporary conservatorship give the public guardian? It gives us the authority to investigate the case and to allow for that individual to remain at the hospital until the initial hearing is held. And again, the initial hearing needs to be held prior to the end of that 30-day hold, regardless of whether or not we have a temporary conservatorship in place. That temporary conservatorship does not buy us additional time to keep that individual involuntarily held past that 30-day hold. Okay, so time is of essence from the time we get a referral to the time we complete our investigation to the time the initial hearing is held. The court does have the power to extend our TCONs past the 30-day hold if they see it necessary, and if there's justifiable cause to extend that involuntary hold period. Okay. All right. Referrals for LPS investigation are usually sent at the end of the 14-day hold or the beginning of the 30-day hold. Okay. Deadlines for submission of referrals, and we also need to meet the notice requirement. Okay. What do we mean by the notice requirement? These patients have rights that need to be met, and one of them is to serve them with a 5-day notice that basically informs them that there's an intent to conserve them. Okay, that 5-day notice also gives instructions to the patient how to receive advocacy services from the patient's rights office that Jim mentioned earlier, to help them get out of the process or find ways to stop the process from moving forward. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So inpatient conservatorships are for persons with serious mental illness who would require involuntary treatment. Only designated doctors and facilities can initiate the LPS referrals. What is the reason for that? The reason for that is that the Department of Mental Health is responsible for granting designation to the acute hospitals around the county. Okay, and part of that designation authorization requires that the treating doctors at these designated facilities provide the testimony required to establish the conservatorship. We have no oversight or any control, or the Department of Mental Health would not have that control over a facility who's not designated by the Department of Mental Health. So again, this is why we can only accept referrals from certain designated facilities. There are 40+ designated facilities in Los Angeles County, one of which is including the jail. Okay. Next slide. LPS inpatient conservatorships require due process during the involuntary holds. Okay. Gail discussed the certification hearing that is held at the facility, and it's a hearing where the facility needs to continue to prove that there's probable cause that the patient remains a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or remains gravely disabled. And this is a hearing which reestablishes the need to keep that individual involuntarily held for the purpose of potentially seeking a conservatorship, okay? During these probable cause hearings, the patient is represented by a patient's rights advocate, okay? All right. There's also Reese hearings. Not just because somebody's involuntarily held gives the doctor at that acute hospital a legal right to force medication, okay? If that individual fails to comply with medication administration, the facility needs to seek a Reese hearing, okay? They complete an application. That application is filed with the court. There's a hearing that establishes that because of that individual's noncompliance with medication, that court will grant that facility the authority to force medication on a patient, okay? All right. Even if we get to establish a temporary conservatorship, that temporary conservatorship does not allow for involuntary medication. If we're in the process of investigating the case and we already have the TCON in place, we would seek to obtain what we call a TCON Reese in order to allow the hospital to force medication until the establishment of the conservatorship. All right. Next slide. Okay, as mentioned previously, the legal basis for an LPS conservatorship is grave disability, okay? Grave disability is defined under Welfare and Institutions Code 5008A, as an apple, is defined as the ability to provide for food, the inability to provide for food, clothing, or shelter due to the mental disorder or impairment by chronic alcoholism. As mentioned earlier, alcoholism is rarely pursued as a primary diagnosis due to the lack of treatment options in the state of California. As far as I'm aware, there is no involuntary treatment program to treat alcoholism currently in California, okay? The person is unwilling or incapable of accepting voluntary treatment. All right. Next slide. Okay. So inpatient temporary conservatorship or TCON, as I mentioned earlier, PG public guardian is appointed temporary conservator over the person only up to 30 days. Okay. A hearing is required before the expiration of the TCON, as explained earlier, and throughout from the time the person is initially picked up on the 5150 to the end of the 30-day, you add those up, and that's 47 days of that it allows us to keep a person involuntarily held. Okay, we cannot go beyond that 47th day unless the court extends our temporary conservatorships beyond that 47-day, or we've already established a permanent conservatorship for that individual prior to the end of that 47-day period. Okay. If the court has not granted an extension on the TCON, or if we failed to conserve that individual prior to the 47th day, that individual must be released from any hold at the acute facility. Okay. All right. While on temporary conservatorship, the appointed public guardian investigator is required to review medical records. They conduct a LexisNexis search to try to find family. They will consult with the current treatment staff. If available, they will interview family, friends, and significant others. And this is when it's key for the family to provide us with that historical information, okay? We will conduct a face-to-face interview with the patient at the facility, okay? And we are required to submit a comprehensive court report with our recommendations. And it is during this court, it is in this court report where we would provide whatever information we've obtained from those sources of information, including the information provided by the family. Okay, next slide. Okay, moving on to our LPS Outpatient Conservatorship Program. About 3 years ago, the Department of Mental Health established what is known as the home team. Okay, it's a homeless outreach and engagement team, and they're designated to make referrals for conservatorship as well. Okay, what does this entail? Basically, this home team is constructed of several different entities, street doctors, nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists, who in essence walk the streets and attempt to engage our chronically homeless population. Okay? The home team usually will determine who is chronically gravely disabled and would make determinations on whether or not they will submit a referral for that individual. Okay. Usually there is a period of engagement that is required, and that can be anywhere from a few weeks to a couple months. And the goal is to try to gain some rapport with that individual who's chronically been living out in the street, and in hopes that they can convince them to accept services, not only street medication, but also housing services independent of the establishment of a conservatorship. Okay, so the home team is their main goal is to attempt to engage that individual and get their buy-in to accept services. Okay, and they've been pretty successful in being able to achieve that in many cases. But there's just some cases where the individuals are way too psychiatrically acute to have any insight whatsoever, and in the case when they refuse all services offered, those are generally the cases that are referred to our office for investigation. Okay. Again, the street clinicians will engage with the chronically homeless clients for an extended period in order to obtain compliance with medication and possibly convince the client to accept housing. This engagement period also allows the clinician to build the necessary evidence to potentially drive that case into an LPS conservatorship. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so what allows us to conduct an outpatient conservatorship process, generally under Welfare and Institutions Code 5352. Okay, a professional person may recommend conservatorship without the person being in an inpatient facility if both of the following are true. The professional person has examined and evaluated the person and determined he or she is gravely disabled. Okay, again, what is grave disability? That individual's inability to provide for their own food, clothing, or shelter. Okay. The professional person has determined that a future examination on an inpatient basis is not necessary for a determination that the person is gravely disabled. All right. Okay, so again, the home team's priority is to engage and gain compliance with treatment and housing. And ultimately, they may need to 5150 an individual if the client's circumstances are dire and that person presents a danger to themselves or a danger to others if they remain on the street. Okay. In some cases, the home team may make the decision to ultimately involuntarily hold that individual in an acute facility if they see that they're putting their life at risk by remaining on the street. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so in those cases where the person we have not gained any compliance, or the home team has not gained any compliance from a homeless individual, the home team will submit the referral application for LPS conservatorship. We hold weekly meetings with the home teams to discuss those referrals, those cases that are being considered for LPS conservatorship. And the reason we hold those weekly meetings is so that there can be an exchange of information, and we can discuss a case to see whether or not it's appropriate to refer. Okay. I can tell you the home team has gotten very good at identifying and helping us establish the evidence necessary to successfully establish a conservatorship. Okay. And usually it's for clients that are severely mentally ill, who have a complete lack of insight, complete lack of cooperation or compliance. And again, those are the type of individuals that usually get referred for conservatorship by the home team. Okay. All right. That referral that is completed by the home team includes what is known as a declaration of grave disability. That declaration of grave disability, in essence, is the legal basis to request the court to grant a temporary conservatorship and set a hearing for a permanent conservatorship. Okay. All right, next page. Back to that declaration of grave disability. That declaration of grave disability that is completed by the clinician is reviewed carefully by the judge prior to the judge granting the temporary conservatorship. Okay, so all the details, all the efforts being made to engage that client, to all the efforts made to allow for that patient to accept voluntary services, what has been offered, what has been denied or refused by the homeless individual, all those details are provided in that declaration of grave disability for the court's consideration. Okay. So usually once we obtain a temporary conservatorship for a home client, the home team will begin the process to initiate placement in the least restrictive setting to meet that client's needs. In the most severe cases, that individual may need to be hospitalized in an acute psychiatric facility. However, if that individual does not require that level of care, the home team will look to possibly place them in a skilled nursing facility, assisted living, any other facility that will meet the client's needs. Okay. The use of an acute hospital is for limited purposes. It is to obtain acute mental health stabilization. It is also necessary to obtain medical clearances in an effort to place that individual in a lower level of care, lower levels of care. Okay. TB tests, other medical clearances that are needed in order to move them to a lower level of care may be obtained during a short hospital stay. Okay. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if that individual refuses medication, at that time we will seek a temporary conservatorship rehearing for the court to grant authorization to involuntarily medicate that patient. Okay. Clinical testimony is also provided by the home team psychiatrist. And in some cases, we may need the testimony of home team clinicians that have, again, engaged or have a history of engagement with that client while they were living on the street. Okay. All right, next slide. Okay. Once permanent conservatorship is established, we will arrange for placement. The public guardian is also responsible for establishing benefits. And we would, that case will be handled on an ongoing basis by the assigned case management deputy. All right. And those case management activities would apply to the same process as would a client that is referred through one of the designated hospitals. Okay. The main responsibility of the case manager, again, is to establish benefits, sign the admission agreements to the placement for the placement facilities, secure any assets that the client may own, and approve medications. Okay. Okay. If the conservatorship is denied or we're not successful, in very rare occasions, the court may deny our conservatorship petitions. The home team will continue to provide outreach and engagement for that individual and may potentially need to consider re-referring that case if the circumstances of that individual change or there is a clear picture as to that individual's grave disability. Okay. All right, next slide. Okay. Conservatorship under the law is should always be the last resort option. A conservatorship removes many of the rights that we take for granted. Again, as I mentioned earlier, where to live, what mental or physical health care to receive or accept, and the ability to handle our one's own finances. Okay. Before a conservatorship is established, all viable, suitable alternatives to conservatorship must be investigated and or tried before public guardian can petition or recommend becoming conservator. Okay. And this is required by statute. Okay. All viable alternatives should be considered prior to the establishment of the conservatorship. And that is something that the court will also take into consideration. What other things have been tried? A diversion program, assisted outpatient treatment. What efforts did the home team, if it's an outpatient client, what efforts did the home team make to provide housing or other services voluntarily to that client? Okay. Those are all alternatives that should be considered. Next slide. Okay. Again, what would be defined as an alternative to an LPS conservatorship? Okay. Ultimately, that individual may not be greatly disabled because they're able to articulate a viable plan for self-care. Okay. In many cases, throughout the 47-day period that I had spoken to, that individual is under intensive treatment, may be under intensive treatment at one of the designated facilities. And at that period of time, they may gain the insight to know that, one, they can create a plan for themselves to provide for their own food, clothing, and shelter. And in some few occasions, we have had cases where that individual has gained the insight and is able to articulate a viable plan for self-care. The key to that is that plan needs to be viable. It can't be something that is just being made up by the client. We need to, as one of the responsibilities of the investigator is to vet that plan and to have a clear understanding that plan is realistic, right? Okay. Another alternative to the conservatorship is the third-party assistance that Jim and Gail mentioned earlier. If an individual is gaining assistance from the family, the hospitals will contact the family and say, are you able to take your loved one home? If that family member agrees to accepting that responsibility and the patient agrees to go back to live with the family, that's accepting of third-party assistance. And under the law, that individual will no longer meet criteria for grave disability. Okay. Okay. The client gains the insight to know that they need treatment, and they're stable enough and have articulated willingness to accept treatment voluntarily. Then in those cases, that individual will no longer be considered gravely disabled. and an appropriate treatment option needs to be obtained by the discharging facility. Okay. Okay. Individuals that are moved to out-of-state placements, those individuals cannot be served by the LA County Public Guardian's Office, as the powers granted by the court in a conservatorship are only good in the state of California. Okay. All right. In some cases, we have individuals who have moved down the continuum of care and have unfortunately gone AWOL from unlocked settings. In some cases, we've seen some individuals go AWOL from locked facilities. Okay, they're given a chance to go on a day trip with other patients, and they end up running away, or they've been placed at a boarding care facility. As Gail mentioned earlier, those boarding care facilities are, even though they're secured and they have wraparound services, they're not locked placements, and individuals can come and go as they want. And in some cases, unfortunately, they do not return. Okay. All right. Okay, next slide. Okay. Psychiatric testimony is required in order to establish grave disability. All right. During the initial hearing, once a TCON is put in place, the court sets a hearing date. During that initial hearing, the patient has the opportunity to either submit or contest that conservatorship. Okay. If they submit to the conservatorship, the court will grant the orders and powers establishing the conservatorship and appoint the conservator at that time. Okay. The legal burden of proof in an LPS conservatorship proceeding is beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay. And that burden of proof is the highest burden of proof in the court of law, and is the same burden of proof that needs to be met in a criminal case. Okay. Why is the burden of proof so high? It is due to the potential need for involuntary treatment and involuntary medication administration. Okay. So again, the evidence needs to be strong. The totality of the case that we're presenting to the case needs to be strong so that the court can grant us the authority if there is a need, again, to involuntarily treat in an IMD setting, and to potentially provide medication administration involuntarily in those settings. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so once the public guardian, once a conservator is appointed by the Los Angeles Superior Court as conservator of a person and estate, the office of the public guardian will manage the daily life and or financial affairs of the conservatee due to their limitations. Okay. And again, that decision-making process by which we handle those affairs are usually supervised by the court. Okay, there's progress inquiries that the court can make. As far as placement, the court normally does set placement hearings to make sure that the placement has been obtained and is appropriate to meet that client's needs. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so what are the powers and responsibilities granted by the court to the conservator? Usually once the court grants the conservatorship, it outlines all the powers necessary to handle that patient's affairs. Okay, so it's placement in an appropriate level of care that meets the client's needs and addresses conditions that led to that individual being greatly disabled. Okay. It provides for 24/7 supervision, administration of medications, and also food, clothing, and shelter. All right. It also grants authorization of the mental health treatment, including psychiatric medication. Powers 8 and 8A. Under Powers 8 and 8A are the powers that grant that authorization to involuntarily medicate. All right. It also may grant a limited medical consent authority under Power 12, and that Power 12 is usually granted to address chronic medical conditions. Okay. For example, the ongoing treatment of diabetes, something that is not invasive in nature. Okay. If a conservatee requires any other medical treatment that may lead to surgery, even a tooth extraction, then we would need to go back as conservators to ask the court for authorization to consent to an invasive medical treatment. Okay. So again, Power 12 limits our authority to consent to treatment only to non-invasive chronic medical conditions. All right. Anything further than that requires an additional authorization from the court. Under State Powers 11 and 13, it allows for the conservator to establish contracts for placement. It allows for the conservator to apply for all financial entitlements, Social Security, veteran benefits, anything that individual is entitled to. All right. It allows us to pay bills and provide for personal needs. Okay. Once we start collecting the client's benefits, there is an allowance that's provided to that client for personal needs. Okay. And it grants us authorization for marshaling assets. Say, for example, in some few cases, if the client has bank accounts, investment accounts, a pension, or if they own real property, these powers would allow us to manage those assets as well. Potentially, we may need to collect bank accounts or collect or become or collect the client's pension to use for their benefit. Okay. Next slide. Okay. The duration of the conservatorship. LPS conservatorships, again, last only 1 year and need to be reappointed in order to be renewed. Okay. So, for example, if the court grants the conservatorship today, the conservator will need to seek conservatorship prior to a year from now. Okay. So usually those hearings are held anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks prior to the expiration date of the current conservatorship. Okay. It is key for any private conservator appointed to work with the treating doctor to complete the required physician's declaration in order to support a reappointment filing. All right. So in order to obtain a reappointment a year from now, you're going to need a declaration from the treating doctor indicating that this individual or the conservatee remains gravely disabled and in essence requires the reappointment of the case. All right. Prior to the expiration of the conservatorship, the treating doctor will evaluate for the need of reappointment of conservatorship and needs to complete that physician's declaration. All right. If the doctor recommends for the continuation of the conservatorship, in the public guardian cases, our county council will petition for reappointment. In cases where there's a private conservator appointed, then it would be again incumbent on the private conservator to file the petitions themselves. Okay. Next slide. Okay. The public guardian will request to terminate the conservatorship if and when the client is found by the treating psychiatrist or the public guardian to no longer be gravely disabled. And what in essence, what does that mean? That means that because of during this initial conservatorship year, we hope that that individual can gain the insight to be able to, again, create a plan for self-care, and there be no any need to continue to impose the conservatorship on that individual. Okay, that's a very high threshold. There's not very many cases where an individual is able to do that within the first year. In many cases, we do seek reappointment. Okay. We will also seek to terminate a case if the client unfortunately went AWOL and whereabouts remain unknown after 60 days. Okay. But again, that's on a case-by-case basis, and we may need to consider that 60-day period depending on the circumstances of each case. Okay. For private conservators, if a reappointment is not filed, the conservatorship will automatically terminate by operation of law a year from the date of establishment. All right. Upon conservatorship termination, the public guardian or private conservator will no longer have the legal authority to act on behalf of the former conservatee. And if that patient remains in a locked facility, if the conservatorship is not reestablished, then we lose the authority to involuntarily treat that individual, and that facility has no other option but to release that individual back to the streets or to the family. Okay, they can no longer be held. All right. Next slide. Okay, forensic cases. As mentioned briefly before, forensic cases are for individuals who have committed a crime and have been determined to be incompetent to stand trial. Okay, usually these forensic type cases, the referrals come from either the jail, from the treating doctors at the jail, or the courts can order the public guardian to conduct an investigation for suitability of LPS as a diversion mechanism, because that individual cannot be tried criminally. Okay. All right. There are certain statutory requirements when for the public guardian to be involved. Okay. For an individual that is charged with a misdemeanor, okay, once that determination is made that there's a doubt raised in the criminal court, the criminal court will likely move that case to the competency court in Hollywood, and those courts are the one that will handle the case moving forward. Okay. There are certain diversion programs that the court may consider. Those diversion programs are handled by the Office of Diversion and Reentry. They can also be referred to AOT, or assisted outpatient treatment. There's also recently they implemented what they call rapid diversion, and those are for individuals who are competent to agree to a rapid diversion process. Okay. There's also court linkages and court liaisons in the criminal courts that assist the courts in obtaining a potential diversion program for certain defendants. Okay. Next slide. Okay. SB 317. SB 317 came into play about 3 years ago. Prior to the implementation of SB 317, both misdemeanor defendants and felony defendants were ordered to what they call competency restoration. So let's take, for example, an individual who committed a misdemeanor offense. If that individual was determined to be incompetent to stand trial, that court, prior to SB 317, could order that individual to be placed in a facility to be restored to competency restoration in order to move the criminal case forward. Okay. With the implementation of 317, that restoration period no longer comes into play. Okay. Once there's a declaration of doubt, again, the case is transferred to the mental health court or the competency courts in Hollywood. Okay. The restoration period to competency was removed under SB 317 in order to reduce or eliminate having to keep individuals in custody. All right. Under SB 317, the mental health court has 4 options. Okay. Mental health diversion, either through AOT or through Office of Diversion and Reentry. Or if a person is too acute to participate in any mental health diversion, the court may ask the public guardian to investigate for suitability of conservatorship. Okay. Or ultimately, the court also has the right to dismiss the case. All right. Next chart. Next slide. Okay. For felony incompetence to stand trial, the process remains the same. There's a declaration of doubt in the criminal court. The case is moved to the mental health court. For felony defendants, there is still a requirement that they be committed to a competency restoration program. And usually that competency restoration program is provided by the Department of State Hospitals, which is currently being impacted because of the volume of individuals who have been committed for competency restoration. Okay. They can also be referred to what is known as jail-based competency treatment, or JBCT. Okay. If the Department of State Hospitals is unable to get a spot for that individual for competency restoration, that individual may, if appropriate, may be referred to a jail-based competency treatment program. Okay. All right. And in some few cases, there is a community-based restoration program under the Office of Diversion and Reentry. Okay. And what does that restoration period require? It requires ongoing treatment for that individual. They take classes to really understand what the court process entails in order to gain the ability to help in their own defense. Okay. If there's a finding that the individual cannot be restored to competency, then that court will likely order the public guardian to investigate for suitability of conservatorship. Okay. With our felony defendants, there are 2 types of conservatorships. One is the regular LPS. The other is what's known as a Murphy conservatorship. Okay. Those Murphy conservatorships apply to individuals who have been determined to continue to be presently dangerous because of violent delusions or assaultive behaviors while at the Department of State Hospitals. Okay. Or while in custody. Okay. The Welfare and Institutions codes that drive the Murphy conservatorship is known as the Welfare and Institutions Code 5008, Section B as in boy. And these are established again when a client is clinically determined to be presently dangerous and is charged with a felony that resulted in grave bodily harm or the threat of grave bodily harm. The Murphy cases are filed and handled by the district attorney. Okay. All right. And just like any regular LPS conservatorship, the Murphy conservatorship needs to be renewed every year after its establishment as well. And in order to continue a Murphy conservatorship, that requires that the treating doctor, in essence, continues to, there is a determination that that individual remains dangerous. Okay. All right, next slide. All right. We'll talk a little bit about the CARE Act and the implementation of CARE Court. Okay, the CARE Act is essentially known as the Community Assistance Recovery and Empowerment Act. Okay, it's under Senate Bill 1338. And it is essentially a new approach to act earlier and to provide support and accountability both to individuals with untreated serious mental illness and to local governments that are ultimately responsible for providing behavioral health services. Okay. The CARE Act will be handled by the civil courts. And there are two initial cohorts. There are some counties that are going to begin implementation of CARE Court as of the 1st of October of this year. LA County is mandated to begin the CARE Court process on December 1st of this year. Okay. So I know this presentation says 2024. I apologize for not catching that. CARE Court in LA County will begin on December 1st of 2023. Okay. There will be two specific CARE Courts, and both of those will be in the Norwalk Court, just like our LPS Court is currently. Okay. Okay, so in essence, what is CARE Court? CARE Court requires certain criteria in order for certain entities to petition for somebody to become part of CARE Court. Okay, the respondent needs to be of 18 years or older. They need to be suffering from a serious mental illness with a current diagnosis of schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorders. The respondent will presently be needed to not be clinically stabilized in ongoing treatment. All right. There is a requirement that one of the following remain true. Okay. It is unlikely that the respondent is unlikely to survive safely in the community without supervision and their condition is substantially deteriorating. Okay. That the respondent is in need of services and supports to prevent relapse or deterioration that would result in grave disability or serious harm to self or others. That participation in the care plan or care agreement would be the least restrictive option necessary to ensure recovery and stability. Okay. That the person is likely to benefit from participation in a care plan or care agreement. Okay. CARE Court is a voluntary approach which allows the respondent to participate in the process. Okay, so again, this is all voluntary, unlike an LPS conservatorship. All right. Next slide. CARE Court petitions will be filed in the county where the respondent lives, where the respondent is found. Where the respondent is found. So if the individual is homeless, if they're found in LA County, then that would be the responsible court for that individual. Okay. Who can petition for CARE Court? A person with whom the respondent lives with, a spouse, parent, sibling, grandparent, or any other individual who stands in what's known as local parentis to the respondent. Okay. The director of a hospital, the respondent is hospitalized at. The director of public or charitable organization, agency, or home who has within previous 30 days provided or currently provided behavioral health services or institution where the respondent resides. Okay. Any licensed behavioral health professional who is or has been within previous 30 days supervising or treating the respondent for a mental illness. Okay. A first responder, either police officer, firefighter, paramedic, mobile crisis response team member, or homeless outreach worker who has repeated interaction or multiple attempts to engage the respondent in voluntary treatment. So the public guardian or private conservator of the respondent can also petition the court for implementation of the care court oversight. Right? The director of the County of Behavioral Health Agency, the director of Adult Protective Services, the director of California Health Services Program, or the California Tribal Behavioral Health Departments, a judge of a tribal court in California, and the respondent themselves. Okay. And in essence, what does care court do? Next slide. Well, prior to getting to that, what are the requirements? The responsible is afforded certain due process elements for care court. There's a notice requirement that the petition has been filed for care court that needs to be served onto the respondent. They also receive a copy of the care court team's evaluation. The respondent has a right to counsel, and when LA County implements care court, the public defender will provide that counsel option to the respondent. Okay. The respondent has a right to be present in court unless presence is waived for some reason. Okay, next slide. So in essence, the care court plan elements will include behavioral health services, which may require mental health or substance use disorder services. Okay. It will assist in providing housing resources, social services, and it also may include medically necessary stabilization medications. The court may authorize administration of medication if all of the following apply. The respondent lacks capacity to give informed consent. The respondent requires appropriate medication as demonstrated by evidence presented by a licensed physician or psychologist, or the court-ordered medication shall not be forcibly administered absent a separate court order. Okay. Again, this is all a voluntary process that requires the respondent's buy-in. Okay. Services and supports ordered by the court are subject to available funding, statutes, regulations, contractual provisions, policies, and eligibility. Okay. All right. Next slide. The CARE Act imposes accountability on the counties. A respondent not participating or failing to comply with a care plan, the court can terminate the participation in the care program and ultimately may refer the client to be investigated for suitability of LPS conservatorship. Okay. So failure to successfully complete the care plan may be a fact considered by the court in any subsequent hearing under LPS. Okay. So again, this goes back to the viable alternatives that were considered. If an individual has failed care court previously, we will be required to provide that information to the LPS court for consideration. All right. If the court finds that the county is not complying with the care court's orders, there could be a fine imposed of up to $1,000 per day, not to exceed $25,000 per client. All right. Repeated not compliance by the behavioral health agency, the court can appoint a receiver to secure treatment at the county's cost. All right. Okay. And before we move on to the next slide, I want to talk about what Gail had mentioned earlier about the efforts of redefining grave disability. And that effort is known as Senate Bill 43. Okay. And reading directly from the legislation, it basically is going to expand. It would expand the definition of grave disability. All right. So the existing law currently, for purposes of involuntary commitment, defines gravely disabled as either a condition in which a person, as a result of a mental health disorder, is unable to provide for their basic personal needs of food, clothing, or shelter, or has been found mentally incompetent as specified. SB 43 will essentially expand the definition of gravely disabled to also include conditions in which a person, as a result of substance use disorder, or a co-occurring mental health disorder and a severe substance use disorder, is in addition to the basic personal needs described previously, and remains unable to provide for their personal safety or necessary medical care as defined. So again, this Senate Bill 43 is currently working its way through the state legislation, and it is anticipated that the governor is likely to sign this bill into effect. If so, its implementation will begin in 2025. Okay, so it's essentially throwing a wider net across individuals for the basis of declaring them gravely disabled. Okay, as it stands today, substance use disorder is not a consideration for grave disability, or any untreated medical conditions are also not currently part of the consideration for grave disability presently. If the bill passes as it is anticipated, then those factors would now also render an individual gravely disabled under the law. Okay. So next slide.
Louis, we need
Yes.
to kind of speed it up a bit.
Yes, that's the
So-
last, this is the last slide right here, Gail.
Okay.
So the mental health court, as Gail indicated before, is located at the Norwalk Courthouse. Okay. LPS initial hearings. Per recent court order, all initial LPS hearings are in person. Court trials require that the client be present in court, appear in person. Okay, court trials and jury trials. All right, next slide. And here are all the contacts for the public guardian's office. If anybody has any questions or we can be of any further assistance, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to provide you whatever guidance or information is necessary. I know that was a lot of information, but again, any questions or anything, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Louis. I appreciate it, especially that last part. Y'all call your legislators, tell them to vote to change the grave disabled. One quick question, Louis, does it still encompass if somebody else is willing to provide food, clothing, or shelter, or did they take that off?
I don't believe that was taken off, Gail. If somebody's willing to provide food, clothing, and shelter, that remains a viable alternative to conservatorship.
Y'all call your legislators, tell them you like this, but you want to add that if somebody has to provide food, clothing, and shelter because of these conditions, they are gravely disabled. A far cry, Florida does it that way. If you have to do that, then you're gravely disabled, as opposed to if somebody provides, you're not. That's ridiculous. Okay, Linda, looking forward to hearing from you with AOT. And this is a program that has helped many, many people, because not everybody needs LPS. So take it away.
Good afternoon. And just before I start, because I know once Judge Herring comes on and talks, that most of the questions at 5:45 will be for him. So let me ask 3 quick questions that were in the chat that I did not answer. I think I know the answers, but I wanted to leave it up to the expert, Mr. Leyva. So if someone is on insulin, that's the injections are invasive. So that requires an exception that they'll have to go back to court. Power 12 does not cover it, or does it cover it?
The key to providing insulin in those cases, or the ongoing treatment of insulin, is that we indicate that at the time of submitting the conservatorship report to the court. Usually
Okay.
the court will grant Power 12 for the ongoing treatment of insulin, but it has to be presented to the court at the time of the hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Can a conservatorship from another state be transferred to LA County?
I have not seen that.
Me either, right?
I have not seen that. I've seen it between counties, but not between states.
Yeah,
Got it.
if I can answer that one, California does not have reciprocity. East Coast, a lot of the states don't, but California does not.
And I thought that, but someone in the chat was feeling like they did. So I wanted to clarify that. And then I know the answer to this too, but I want you to answer it. So can a wife be the conservator for her husband?
Yes.
Yes, that's what
Yes.
I thought too.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
perfect.
again, we would prefer for the family to act in that capacity. However, as there is several factors that may prohibit family to act in that capacity, if the family member has been the subject of violent behaviors by the patient towards family, then we may ask for the public guardian to be appointed, because we don't want to make sure that the person acting in that capacity is willing and appropriate, and the family dynamics needs to be considered as well.
Right, thank you.
Mhm.
And let me just say before I start mine, and I know, oftentimes, and Gail and Jim may kill me for this, oftentimes when you are the conservators, you have the authority to get your loved one the care that they need. You don't always have the ability to get your loved one the care they need, given law enforcement don't understand what conservatorships are, and through no fault of your own, but given some of the systems and the way the systems operate, it's taking a lot more education to get everyone on board to understand your authority and to be able to assist you with your authority to get folks the care that you need. So Gail and Jim might kill me later, but
Linda,
that's-
if you're referring to getting somebody back in the hospital when they refuse their medications, we
right,
cover that tomorrow. That's at 5358.5. And Dr. Curly Bonds has been very instrumental in that. But sometimes and we have a technique that we can get it done fairly quickly. And I want people to do it fast. Don't let your person decompensate.
right, really, thank you.
Linda, if I can add to that,
Sure.
the challenges for the public guardian are the same challenges as a private conservator. The court grants us the authority, but convincing the entities necessary to provide the services that we have the court authority to do this is a everyday challenge for us as well. The hospitals they'll hide behind certain languages to medical necessity, acuity levels, to convince us that it's not appropriate to admit somebody into their hospital. However, we know that the court has already granted us the authority to do that. The
Right.
court has already determined that the individual is greatly disabled. Again, but convincing these hospitals to do that is easier said than done in some cases.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I'm just going to add this. That's why when a person's under the conservatorship, they decide, I'm not going to take the medications. Don't wait. Try for a week to try and get them to do it. If they don't do it, call me, call Jim. Miriam Brown with DMH. She's the emergency outreach.
Deputy Director of our Emergency Outreach and Triage Division.
Oh, I'm so glad you knew that big long name. But we get her, she knows how to do this. Everybody's been educated and they go get them and bingo, in the hospital they go. If you do it quickly, then they can go in and usually it's okay. They take their medicine, they're good to go. They don't tend to do that again. The longer you wait, the longer they end up having to stay in the hospital. And I really don't like it when you have to wait, because It's ridiculous. As conservator, you are supposed to be seeing that that loved one is progressing towards recovery. So please don't wait. And then I'll be quiet. I'm sorry.
No problem. So again, I'm going to be talking to you about the Assisted Outpatient Treatment Program, otherwise known as Laura's Law. And Laura, there's a picture of Laura Wilcox here. Laura was a student in college who would volunteer in a mental health clinic on her vacations, on her summers, winter breaks. On her vacations off, she would intern in a mental health clinic in Nevada County, which is a small county in Northern California. And so in 2001, a client she was home on winter break and was volunteering in the clinic when a client walked into the clinic who had been non-compliant with mental health treatment and shot and killed Laura, injured someone else, went into a restaurant, killed someone in the restaurant, I believe the manager, and injured someone in the restaurant. And her parents fought for treatment for folks who are non-compliant with mental health treatment. So former Assemblywoman Helen Thompson developed Senate Bill 1421, which established a lot of things. It established, among other things, the Assisted Outpatient Treatment Program, or Laura's Law, but also it established 5150.05 of the Welfare Institution Code, which says that law enforcement, mental health, anyone writing a 5150 shall consider history. If the history is relevant and they believe the person giving that history is credible. So when you tell someone, last night, my son, my daughter, my mother, my sister, my brother, my grandchild did this, they shall listen to that. And they shall take that information into account if they believe it is relative to the 5150, which we know it is, and if they believe you are credible. And for the most part, family members are very credible in giving information. You're all credible in giving information about your loved one. As everyone has said, you know your loved one best. Next slide, please. So what AOT allows us to do, it allows the Department of Mental Health to treat seriously mentally ill people who are at substantial risk of deterioration or who are going to need to be 5150'd as a result of poor psychiatric treatment compliance. So all of the AOT, we call them candidates, and I'll go back and forth between candidates and clients, just because that's how my brain works, sorry. So we outreach to our candidates, and if someone will volunteer to the services, then we connect them to an AOT full service partnership, or we can connect them to an ERS. And I don't know if folks are familiar with full service partnerships, or FSPs as we refer to them. And they're a whatever it takes kind of program. So they go in the field and they provide case management, therapy, psychiatric support. Now, you may need to go into a clinic to see the psychiatrist, because psychiatrists in clinics in the full service partnerships don't always have time to be able to go from place to place to see clients. But then the case manager will make arrangements for that client to get to the clinic to see the psychiatrist. With COVID and since COVID, many of the psychiatrists are seeing folks via telehealth, and nurse practitioners are administering the medications in the field and are continuing to follow up in the field with the family members and with the client. Enriched residential services programs were mentioned in Luis's talk. They're kind of a one-stop shop where folks get individual treatment, they get medication by the psychiatrist, they get case management support, and a myriad of groups while they're living in that residential treatment facility. So it's a more intensive level of treatment. Next, and yes, FSP is similar to CARE, I just saw the ACT program. They're very similar. Their FSP is based on the ACT model. So if the client refuses our outreach and engagement efforts, then we can petition the court for mandated outpatient treatment. So you will notice that the more I'm talking, the more you'll see the similarities between AOT and care court. And even though care court is deemed as voluntary, there is a hearing on the merits, and the judge will order that client to comply with treatment, similar to what happens in the AOT program. They're both very similar. There's not a lot of sticks. So if the client absolutely refuses to comply, there's not much we can do, and that's why they're considered voluntary, but they are court ordered. The legal evidence is clear and convincing. Where you heard with LPS that it is beyond a reasonable doubt for care court and for AOT, the legal standard is clear and convincing evidence, which I think 50 means something like 51% of a normal population would deem it reasonable that this person be mandated to the treatment. So we have expanded our interagency collaboration. Now it includes courts, county council, public defender, patients' rights. We've always collaborated with local law enforcement, social service agencies, our contracted agencies. So it's really expanded the Department of Mental Health's collaboration along for outpatient care, because Luis has always been collaborating with the courts. But for outpatient care, it's extended the collaboration between the Department of Mental Health and other entities that take care of folks who have a mental illness. Next slide, please. So this is the criteria that is by statute of who is eligible for AOT, and you'll notice that these are very similar to who is eligible for care court. So they must be 18 years of older. They must have a serious mental illness. So for AOT, it can be any DSM-5, which is our sort of Bible of diagnostic criteria. It can be any mental health, any treatable mental health illness outlined in DSM-5. You heard with care court, it has to be schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorder. So bipolar, major depression, PTSD, those all count with AOT. Person must be unlikely to survive safely in the community without supervision, same as with care court. They must have a history of non-compliance with treatment that has resulted in either. So here's where we're a little different. So in order to qualify for AOT, you have to have 2 hospitalizations or 2 forensic incarcerations, like mental health treatment in a jail facility within the last 36 months, or a serious threat or attempt to cause or an attempt or threat to cause serious physical harm to yourself or someone else in the last 48 months. And the reason we say it in months as opposed to years, because 36 months is 3 years, 48 months is 4 years, is that it is month to month. So if I'm looking at our AOT referrals and someone had a hospitalization in August 2020, that hospitalization is falling off our radar this month. So I'm not going to be able to count that hospitalization as a hospitalization that would qualify for AOT. Does that make sense? And the same if someone had hit somebody in August 1st of 2019, I cannot count that threat or attempt to cause serious physical harm, because that occurrence that happened on August 1st has fallen off the radar. So it is month to month, and that's by statute. So we have no control over that. The person must be substantially deteriorating. They have behaviors that are likely to result in grave disability or in serious harm to themselves or others unless they get treated. They've failed to engage in available treatment. It is believed that AOT is the least restrictive setting and that they will benefit from AOT, so that you can see that many of these requirements are the same as for care court. And for our hospitalizations, we don't have to show that it was a 14-day hold or a 5250 as it happens in care court. It can be a voluntary hospitalization. It can be a 5150. They could have gone to an Exodus urgent care or a Starview urgent care and been released, but they were sent there on a 5150. All of that for us counts as a hospitalization. So it's not necessarily the number of days they spend in the facility. It's the fact that they were sent to the facility and accepted into the facility on that hold or voluntarily. And then even if they were released within the 3 days, that counts for us. Next slide, please. What happens when someone is referred to us? We provide extensive outreach and engagement for a minimum of 30 days. We perform screening, we do psychiatric assessments, and then we link them. If the client is agreeable, we link them to an AOT FSP provider or an ERS provider. If the client is refusing any kind of service or treatment, and they are deteriorating, we may petition the court to order mandated mental health treatment. And then we participate in the court hearing and we follow up on the court mandates. So let me stay with this for just a second. And what happens is there are times when we outreach to a client and the client does not want any services. And it may be someone who, let's say, is living at home with the family. They're eating, they're sleeping, they're not threatening to hurt anyone, they're not threatening to hurt themselves. They're taking care of their what we call activities of daily living. They're bathing, they're showering. They may spend all day in their room. They may be hearing voices, they may be having delusions, but their day-to-day living is not compromised in any way. We're not going to be, and this is kind of their baseline. As much as we want to be able to provide treatment to that person, we're not going to be able to petition that the court. The public defender is going to, if the court even accepts the petition, public defender is going to fight like crazy saying there is no risk to this client. So even though the person is not living in a way that we would want for them, or that we often cannot petition that person because they're not deteriorating. This has been their baseline. They've been this way maybe for a year, 2 years, 3 years. The other important piece about assisted outpatient treatment, the same as with care court, is there is no mandatory medication. So the only program we have currently that allows for involuntary medication outside of a hospital is a conservatorship, or if someone is deemed a felony incompetent to stand trial and they're ordered into some sort of treatment. Involuntary medication can be ordered for those folks. Outside of that, even in custody, even in Twin Towers, if someone is refusing medication, and even in a hospital, if someone is refusing medication and they're not a danger to themselves or someone else, the hospital cannot, or the jail cannot medicate them involuntarily. They must go to court and ask for a Reese hearing. As Luis mentioned, he must do with a TCON. So it is the same for getting medication for folks involuntarily. And with AOT, again, in care court, the judge may order them, may encourage. Judge Herron doesn't order, he encourages folks to take medication, but often we're using the black robe, the respect for the judge, to hope to get compliance. But there is no involuntary medication, either with AOT or with care court. Next slide, please. So who can refer? And again, this is going to look very similar to what you heard Luis talk about in terms of care court. A cohabitant who's age 18 or over, so a roommate, a close relative, a parent, a sibling, a spouse, a child over the age of 18. If the grandparent or an aunt or an uncle is the only person who is close to that, who's close to seeing someone, then then we will consider them as a close relative. We often have grandparents who've been taking care of their grandchild since birth. We have aunts and uncles who are very involved in the care of their nieces and nephews, and there's no other family member involved. We will consider them as close relatives. The director of a residential care facility, board and care, or hospitals, and it's usually not the directors, it's their designees. So social workers from hospitals refer, board and care operators refers, licensed mental health treatment providers, a peace officer, parole officer, probation officer, and I need to add to this slide, a superior court judge may be eligible. They are the ones who are available to be able to refer to AOT. You can see the list is very similar to care court. We already accept from our mobile crisis teams. We already accept from a mental health provider on our homeless team, our homeless outreach teams. It does allow in care court for paramedics, which we don't have with AOT, but so the next slide, please. So this is the AOT process. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner, we receive the referral, and you can fill the referral out online. If you Google AOT-LA, the DMH's AOT website comes up. If you click on that and go near the bottom, it talks about the new referral form. You can fill that out, and it addresses each of the 9 criteria I outlined for AOT. You can send that via email to a DMH mailbox. We gather every Tuesday after, so one of my staff gathers the information. They may call you if you're the referring party. If PMRT, another mobile crisis team, or some other agency referred your loved one, we will, and your number is there, we will call you to get information, to gather what's going on, to gather what's happening. We have a referral review team that meets every Tuesday, where we vet all of the referrals to make sure that they do meet AOT criteria. Once they've been accepted to AOT, then I refer them to my outreach staff, who go out to provide outreach and try and get the person engaged in services. As I've said, if the person agrees to services, we connect them to a full service partnership or an ERS immediately. So we have about over 300 folks right now enrolled in the AOT program. And of those, we probably have maybe 80 that are court ordered in a given time. And then we do the outreach. If the client refuses, then we may petition the court for the mandated outpatient treatment. And then once the petition is granted, if the petition is granted, then we begin we refer them to the FSP or the ERS, and intensive outpatient services begin. Next slide, please. So this is what happens with the petition process. We have a psychologist who unfortunately is leaving us, and so, or our licensed staff will go out to see the client. So let me say the outreach team is made up of licensed staff, unlicensed staff, a psychiatric technician, nurse, so that if a client does say they'll accept medication, even while we're outreaching, we will communicate with a psychiatrist in DMH. We had our own for a while, but then we had a psychiatrist part-time who would come in the field with us and would evaluate clients, recommend medication. He left, and since then we've not had a replacement for him. So we will use Holmes psychiatrist. We have another psychiatrist, Dr. Martinez, who will work with us. So we are able to medicate clients who are agreeable even while we're doing our outreach. And this is particularly important if someone's been hospitalized and they were started on a long-acting injectable, Invega, as Gail mentioned, or Abilify for those who have mood disorders. And it's very important for them to keep up that medication. And they often, I don't want to say often, but we do have clients who will agree to keep up the medication. So we want to make sure that we have a psychiatrist to order that, and then the psychologist or nurse will my psychologist or nurse will go in the field and will administer that medication to the client. So the two-person teams provide the outreach to the clients. They deem the client is not going to comply with any treatment and they are deteriorating. Our psychologist goes out with that team and interviews the client. And what they need to establish is that the client meets the criteria for AOT. So they have a treatable mental illness. She needs to observe some of the signs or the symptoms of the mental illness so that she can be able to fill out an affidavit. And she fills out an affidavit which speaks to the 7 criteria for Laura's Law and how the client meets that criteria. She submits that to county counsel, who draws up the petition. As a part of that, she must also offer the client a treatment plan, and all of this is by statute. So once she's offered the client a treatment plan, most of the time the client refuses to sign that treatment plan. So she submits her affidavit along with the treatment plan with the original referral that we got for the client and our investigation about how they met AOT criteria. She submits that to county counsel, who draws up a petition, sends it back to us, and our director or her designee, usually Dr. Bonds, signs those petitions. And then county goes back to county counsel. They file the court date, which is now in Norwalk Court, and a hearing date is set. Next slide, please. So what happens? So the public defender and her, every public defender has a licensed clinical social worker assigned to them. So our public defender and her social worker go into the field to go out and talk to the client, see if they're willing to accept AOT treatment. If the client is willing to accept AOT treatment, then they sign what is called a settlement agreement. So they are still under the court's purview, but there's no need to hold a hearing. So when the court date comes up and their case comes up, the public defender submits that signed agreement, at which the client has stated they will comply with all of the parts of AOT. They'll receive therapy, they'll receive case management, they're willing to at least talk to the psychiatrist and consider medication. And if the client says pound sand, which is often the nicest thing the client says to us, then a hearing is held. And at that hearing, the psychologist presents testimony about why the person meets the AOT criteria. Public defender gets to cross-examine our psychologist. Then if the client, and then if there are any other witnesses, they will also be interviewed under oath. So let me just say that if the criteria for meeting if the criteria for AOT is based on threats, then we're going to need the family member or whoever witnessed or experienced that threat to testify to that threat in court. So we often have clients who do not meet the hospitalization threshold, nor have they been incarcerated. They don't meet the mental health treatment in jail threshold, but they do meet the threshold based on threats. And so we do understand that that is sometimes difficult for families. We understand that families often are afraid that it's going to jeopardize their relationship with your loved one. We often know also that sometimes the testifying would put the family at risk, that the client has been verbally or physically aggressive with family, and that having them testify would put you at risk. What will happen is that our county counsel will talk to you, we'll get your statement, we'll write it down, we'll send it to the public defender. Public defender may call and talk to you so that she understands that what you're saying is the truth and all of that. And then if both parties agree, if she agrees, then we will send it to Judge Herron and he will look at it and vet it and decide if it can be entered into testimony or not. Oftentimes families do testify in court. they feel like getting the treatment, and this is solely for treatment. This is not a criminal trial. There's no, if the clients do not comply with treatment, there is no incarceration. We are able to hospitalize folks for not complying, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But the purpose of this court is solely to get the client treatment. The court is very collaborative. I know it doesn't sound that way. And the reason that we have to have family members or the witnesses testify is because of the Sanchez ruling. So anything that happens outside of court that we don't see, that the family tells us, is hearsay, and hearsay is not admitted into court. And I'm sure Judge Herring can talk more about that. But so that is why we need testimony from family members or from the folks who have witnessed it. When we have law enforcement who've been the witnesses, it's very difficult for us to get them to testify. So sometimes if that's the threat, you know, it becomes difficult for us to petition if that's the only criteria, because the getting police to testify requires a subpoena, which we have done. But that doesn't always work out. So sometimes when someone's committed a crime or has done something, and we're not able to get the witness, we cannot proceed with the petition hearing. And then the judge listens to all sides and he makes a decision whether or not we've met the statutory requirements with clear and convincing evidence, and rules on the petition. Next slide, please. Once the petition is sustained, the petition, an AOT petition, is for 6-month increments. So generally the court will order compliance, and then he monitors all aspects of the treatment, including medication. So the fact that medication is not mandatory and there is no ability for any involuntary medication doesn't mean that we don't consider medication important and medication compliance important. And the judge encourages folks to at least talk to the psychiatrist and consider what the psychiatrist is saying. We're hoping that over time, as the treatment team develops a relationship with the client and the client begins to trust the teams, that they will be more inclined to listen and maybe try medication. And our hope is that with medication, if they begin to feel better and their symptoms are less, and they feel a better quality of life, that they will continue. And we, again, rely very much on the black robe effect for AOT compliance. And as I said before, it is a very collaborative court. So everyone is there to encourage the client. If the client is having difficulties, the judge is very concerned about any difficulties they have. Anytime that we are not providing service in a way that we should, or the client feels like they're not getting what they should, everyone does everything they can. The public guardian goes out and maintains contact with the clients while they're court ordered. And we have progress hearings. So depending on how well the client is doing is how often we bring the client back to court. The statute requires a minimum of 60 days, which is the same for care court. We do see clients much more frequently than that. Some clients enjoy coming to court in person. Some clients will come to court via WebEx, and some clients refuse to come to court at all, even though they are petitioned. Next slide, please. So once they're petitioned, we assign them to a full service partnership or an ERS, and their treatment begins. And as I said, we have sent the reports to the court. And again, the frequency depends on how they're doing and what needs to happen. The two times that we do have a little stick is that in order for us to have a hearing, the client must have been examined by our psychologist or one of my licensed mental health providers, one of my licensed mental health treatment staff. And the reason I said providers is because at the end of the 6 months, if the client has not successfully completed treatment and they feel like ongoing treatment is necessary and they still meet the criteria, a repetition can happen so that that treatment gets extended. For that repetition hearing, the person filling out the affidavit and providing all the information to the court are the FSP providers, because they're the folks who are seeing our clients every week, who have multiple contacts with them during the week and who know them best. So my outreach, the Department of Mental Health outreach and engagement staff do the initial hearing, and any subsequent hearings are done generally by the full service partnership or ERS providers. If we are not able to examine the client, it just happened last week, the psychologist went out to see a client for the second time to try and examine them for the court, and the client said, no, thank you, walked into the bedroom and shut the door. So there was nothing that the psychologist could glean from the contact that would indicate the type of mental illness, the symptoms, any of that. Even though she reads all of the Department of Mental Health records, if they're part of a full service partnership or other treatment, she gets all of those records. She may review law enforcement contacts, especially with our law enforcement mental health teams, MET, SMART, HOPE, all of those teams. But the statute said within 10 days of writing that petition, she must see the client. And she must do a face-to-face evaluation and or assessment to see if they meet the criteria for AOT. With this client, even though she had seen him more than once and the client refused both times to talk to our psychologist, she had no way to determine face-to-face the symptoms, even though she was sure the person met criteria based on our outreach and engagement staff's contacts with the clients and all of the information she gleaned from the electronic records. So we asked the court for a 5346D3, which allows us to hospitalize a client for the purposes of determining if they meet AOT criteria, for the purposes of being able to petition that client. That's one time we can hospitalize the client. Another way we can and 5346 is the Welfare Institution Code statute. Another way we can hospitalize a client is with a 5346F. The statute says that the client is not meeting with the provider, they're not doing well, then that the provider can hospitalize the client on an F order. So an F order means that a client does not necessarily have to meet 5150 criteria. I often say they can be 5149 or 5149 and a half. For the most part, when we are doing a 5346F order, the clients they do meet 5150 criteria as well. And we asked the court for the F order, not because the statute requires it, but because particularly in LA County, we've had a lot of difficulty having law enforcement assist us to have that person get on the gurney. And after George Floyd and the subsequent days following all of that, it has gotten even harder for our folks, whether it's our mobile crisis teams, whether an FSP or we're out there seeing our client and we know they meet 5150 criteria at that moment. We put them on a hold, we call the ambulance, we call law enforcement for assistance, and they will not put hands on, and they will not they often verbally try and assist us, but if the client refuses, everyone walks away.
Then we have to kind of,
okay,
we're into the judge's office.
So the judge will order the 5346 and we will hospitalize the client, often with the 5150 for medical necessity. So let me just say that when a client successfully completes AOT, before COVID, we would have them come in, give them Target gift cards. We would bring their favorite treat. The judge would come off the bench, take their pictures. Everybody claps, everybody cheers. We still do that even in the days now since COVID when people are on WebEx. We often try and get them a gift card to give to them. It's a big deal when someone completes AOT successful, the court portion, and graduates. Next slide. We can skip this. We can skip this slide. And so I think we can skip this as well. We've talked about all of the benefits. A person does not have to have a criminal charge. We can skip this. And And this is our general phone number, and we'll be happy to answer any questions after Judge Herring.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it very much. Okay, we have Judge Scott Herring, who's from the Mental Health Court, and an amazing judge. I mean, I'm just hearing feedback. I've not met him in person, but I have heard so many wonderful things. So, Judge, if you want to take it away.
Well, I want to thank you for inviting me. I have been an advocate for NAMI for many years when I was in practice doing my defense work. So I really appreciate the invitation, and I am now at a loss as what you would like from me because most of you have actually a longer time and experience in dealing with the court system, in the mental health court system, than I do, because I just started in January, and it has been a very, very steep learning curve, which Ms. Boyd can actually probably personally comment on. It's not an easy subject matter to try and wrap your heads around. Plus, remembering at the heart of everything for the mental health court is the idea that everybody needs an opportunity to not be on conservatorship or to be away from the process. So that is pretty much my focus every day that I go over everything. And like right now, before we got on, I'm reviewing my cases for next week. It's a significant amount of work. It's a significant amount of information because we have a significant amount of clients, and these folks that come in here deserve the attention of the parties and a judge that does their due diligence to make sure that I know as much as I possibly can know about each person and try and direct everybody towards the same goal, which is the welfare and the safety of the people involved in the case. And hopefully that leads to people getting off conservatorship and being away from the court system and being safe and healthy. So that's generally the way I kind of look at it. So
Okay,
yeah.
Would you like for me to kind of give you a lot of ideas what the people are looking for?
I'm happy to respond as best as I can to questions without them being, case specific.
Oh, no, we won't do case specific, that's for sure. When families are going to the mental health court, they're really nervous because their loved ones, as you know, can present very well. We always suggest that they have like 3 open-ended questions, which will give more of an idea of where their mind is. Like, the FBI is chasing them. So the question would be, I understand the FBI has been chasing you and following you. How can we help you with this situation? Because the people are smart. Many of them are very brilliant. And the family knows when they get there, at that point in time, they can pull it together, walk out of the courtroom and be all over the place. So what they're looking for is, we know that they have to be gravely disabled and have a serious mental illness. I think we've had judges before that won't listen to families when they are giving testimony, but sometimes I think that's important for the judge to listen to. That's my opinion. I'm not a judge. So
okay. Let me see if I can
address that conversation.
Let me see if I can jump in there right there. I am limited as to what is presented to me because it's the parties that have to present the evidence. Okay. So I don't get to call witnesses. So if we have a contested court trial to determine whether or not somebody should be on conservatorship or remain on conservatorship, I am limited to who the attorneys call. Okay. A lot of times that is usually limited and sufficient that we get the psychiatrist or the psychologist to testify because they can usually testify to a lot of the symptoms that the person has been presenting recently. And most of the interviews are done within a week or 2 of the hearing. So it's usually pretty fresh. The family are always absolutely welcome for all of the proceedings, but I am limited as to who the attorneys call for that presentation. So if nobody calls the family as one of the witnesses in it, they're not going to have that opportunity. They should reach out, I would presume, to public guardian or county counsel, the people that are going to present the case. But again, the attorneys are driving the ship. Okay, they're the ones that provide the information to me. And please, I hope you guys, and I think Ms. Boyd can confirm, I really take this job quite seriously. So I don't walk into the courtroom not knowing anything about the history of who's coming before me. All right, so this is a bigger issue for somebody who's new for a petition, but for renewals, I have a decent amount of background information, and I do very much, especially in court trials, I participate a lot more. So I usually engage the clients, just as you're saying, in open-ended questions, because usually the longer they talk, the more information can tend to come out. And I can read the room okay. So, so the family, and that's part of the frustration in this work, is that I don't have control over the evidence that's presented before me, and I can only base my information on the evidence that is presented. So it's kind of up to the lawyers that do that. The family, it is such an incredibly difficult thing to see the traumas that the family goes through, how much they care and love about their conservatee, potential conservatee, but we are going to remain limited to what the law can allow and what evidence is presented before me. So if there is a chance to speak to the party's attorneys before the proceedings, to let them know your concerns, let them know, you know, maybe some of the symptomology that may not be as readily apparent, that would probably be the best bet to get that information to me in one way or the other.
You've answered a big problem for all of us, because I think sometimes the families don't address county counsel, and whereas they need to. We kind of try to give them the knowledge, what, you know, when you go to court, what to expect, things that you can do to help out with the case. And for the most part, most families do it, but there are families that haven't been through our program, and they're at a loss, which is unfortunate. It's just what it is. But that is, I mean, unless somebody else has another question, that's the biggest one that we were looking at. Is I understand that you look at the facts, you analyze the facts, and then you make your decision with what you are given. And that we're most grateful for.
I would like to ask a question, Gail.
Sure.
On AB 1424, that says that the families have the right to present the mental health history of the individual to the CAT team, to the hospital doctors, etc., and that they must consider that and kind of take that into consideration when they're trying to determine whether or not somebody meets criteria for a hold and so forth. And yet when it moves forward into the courtroom, they don't allow hearsay. So hearsay is allowed up front to get somebody into the hospital and to petition for a conservatorship, but then that just can't move forward to the whatever judge is trying the case. Why is it that the hearsay is not allowed? I just wondered about that.
Well, the hearsay rule is as old as our judicial system. Okay, so the hearsay rule will stand there. It's been refined over the years, decades, you know, generations. The issues when it comes down to whether or not somebody should currently be hospitalized is because it's kind of an acute situation, okay? There has to be an immediate determination of whether or not they need to hold on to this person for their own safety and their welfare. Remember, they're being placed in a hospital circumstance because they presumably present as a danger to themselves or others. So all information they're going to try and gather at that point to try and protect that individual immediately. When we get into the court proceedings, We're now talking about a civil detention. We're talking about the taking away of an individual's freedom, okay? We're talking about the ability to lock somebody up in theory and keep them intentionally and restricted to a facility that takes away their freedom, which is why we actually have a standard of proof for the decision in these cases of beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the same standard as a criminal standard.
I see.
So there's a balance between, you know, an immediate acute psychiatric hospitalization and what is necessary for them to make a decision, and then presenting the information for, you know, potentially taking away somebody's freedom to begin a conservatorship process and whether or not that should be sustained and remain in place. So there's different things to be considered at each point. Do not forget though, okay, the information for why a person gets hospitalized is all available to the then testifying doctor, okay? So the doctor knows about that information when they go to interview the individual for whether or not they are presently gravely disabled, okay? Some of the information may be able to come in. Family stories aren't necessarily something that can come in, but symptomology can, okay? Which gives the doctor an ability to take a look at the information that the family provided to color how they approach the circumstance, okay? Just like, I'm never going to get Gail's name ever straight.
Gail is
So Gail has mentioned being able to talk to the treatment team. I kind of lost my train of thought, sorry. Being able to talk to the treatment team, give them that information. That information ends up trickling down, okay, or trickling up, however you want to put it. All right, that information is always a basis or a foundation of where we move forward. And I would argue that it's almost more important for that information to be presented at the hospitals and for those immediate evaluations, because we do have a significant challenge that I have since learned of hospitals not releasing somebody very quickly after the 72 hours or a shorter version, and they just kind of cut them loose. And, you know, they're back hospitalized again within other days. This is a systemic issue for hospitals and, you know, beyond what I can resolve.
Okay, thank you for that clarity.
Well, sure, it's no problem. Can I try and address people's other concerns? I mean,
yes.
when I'm in court, every day we have, and I wish I could show you the calendar, every day we have over 50 to 60 cases to be heard, and usually somewhere around 5 or 6 court trials. Okay, that's not including the people that demand jury trials as well. We are the only LPS court in Los Angeles County.
Wow.
So that means I'm trying to get to everybody's cases as quick as possible and attempt to do everything, it's fair justice, but kind of limit how much information is being presented. Otherwise, I will never get to the next person who has equally that amount of importance to have their case heard. So I may periodically shut down information in the court, but the biggest clue that I can let you know about most judges is that if a judge is cutting someone off, it's not because they're trying to be rude. It's not because they don't need the information. It may be because the information isn't necessary at this point. So I have a tendency to allow people to talk forever if there's a greater chance that I'm going to rule against them. Whereas I don't need to hear as much from somebody that it's looking like I'm going to rule in favor of. Okay, you kind of understand that balance there?
Mm-hmm.
Remember, there's a right to appeal every decision that I make. So if I have enough information to sustain a petition or a placement hearing or whatever, you know, I'm going to focus on the party that I think, you know, is losing at that point to give them an further opportunity to be heard. So therefore, I need to hear less from the party that's in the advantageous position. Okay.
That
So
makes a lot of sense.
I'm just trying to explain that You know, our courtroom is really dynamic. It's very active with, 40 people appearing via WebEx, waiting for their case to be called and other issues. And I do tend to try and prioritize people that are in facilities, especially the state hospitals, especially the IMDs. I primarily start with the people that are present in court, because I've had enough circumstances with people present in court that kind of, even in that instant, kind of decompensate a little bit. They get stressed out, they get really nervous. So I try and focus on those folks as quick as possible to get them done. And then I move into the circumstances where, are less imperative, less, critical to be able to get to. Unfortunately, that means in my court, somebody goes first and somebody goes last. So I know people get extremely impatient and go, when is my case going to be called? When I can get to it, when it's ready and when I can get to it. And of course, if there's priorities, I do accept priorities in the courtroom. You just got to let the attorneys know that there's an issue and I'm trying to take care of it. I do like to see, as much as possible, unless they don't want to appear, I like to see the conservatees, because I like to get a feel for the person. I like to get a feel for the person whose life we are involving ourselves in. And so any given opportunity that I have to see somebody in person, or at least on WebEx, I really do appreciate, because it gives me a better indication. A lot of times the reports that I read don't necessarily accurately, with no fault to the authors, encapsulate the person that I'm talking with, the person that I'm dealing with. So it is nice to be able to see them for their reappointment proceedings. I know that that's not always possible. And I know that the public defender's office and the attorneys that are involved in the cases, they are overwhelmed. We have so many cases that you only have so many workers that can try and in advance speak to the conservatee and try and figure out what they want to do in advance. So there's a lot of times when we appear in court that the attorneys haven't had a chance to speak to them. And if that's the case, they're really hoping that they're present in court or on WebEx so they can at least get an idea about what they want on that day. So it's not easy. And I know that a lot of the client base is not exactly the most cooperative group of folks in the world. But that being said, at some point we still need to have their input, because their input is a constitutional right. And their input is, I have to hear it, what they want to do with their conservatorship. So
The doctors are allowed to testify through WebEx still.
they do.
They don't
And
have.
they do. It's nice to have them present. I will give them that. Most of them are appearing for the jury trials in person.
Right.
For the court trials, a lot of them continue to appear by WebEx, and provided you have a decent web service and what's it called? Internet service and provider, it's going okay. It's really challenging though with WebEx, because a lot of times you get interference. Their voices are dropping out, and on top of the stress that's going on in the court, to have technical difficulties constantly is a challenge. So I do miss the days when everybody's in court in person.
That had to make it a lot easier then. So
Well,
now,
yeah.
now, do you do AOT with Linda Boyd, or you do? And those cases, from what I understand, people are listening to you. When you ask them to be compliant with treatment, from what I understand, they're doing a pretty good job doing that.
Well, we try. Then there's a whole nice group of people that hear, so you're not ordering me to take medication. I'm like, well, I can't. I am recommending it. I believe you have very little to lose to try it for a little while to see if it improves your life, to see if it improves how you're getting along in this world. Because at least trying it for a little while, when you're not forced to do it, will give you a nice understanding. But sometimes rational discussions about what things can be helpful don't always work out. Sometimes they do. We've had a streak of a lot of people that they're not going to. I do like to try and explain to them the benefit of AOT and being a voluntary patient. how it actually can really help them if there ever comes an issue about a conservatorship. Because there is actually a tie-in between somebody doing well on AOT and making them not appropriate for a conservatorship because they voluntarily assisted, they voluntarily participated. It really is a very good connection. Or if they didn't voluntarily participate and they absolutely refuse to involve themselves, you know, that's another thing that the doctors look at as to whether or not a conservatorship should be requested. So AOT can be of significant help if it is available to an individual.
Okay. Araceli, are there any questions? We don't want people to bring up specific cases, but if
Okay.
somebody has a question, they're welcome to ask.
Well, sure, and I can just decline.
Let me stop recording.
Okay.